Somewhere on this spinning earth, a story that would one day shape the lives of billions is beginning. But it doesn't start with the clash of armies or the crowning of a king. It doesn't begin in a gleaming palace or a grand temple filled with chanting priests. Instead, it begins with a whisper, a subtle, private stirring in the heart of one man living in a world that has long since crumbled to dust. A world of forgotten gods and sun-baked brick cities. It's a mystery how such a quiet moment, a single decision to pack up and leave, could echo so loudly through the millennia, creating fault lines in history and inspiring staggering acts of both love and violence. The origins of this tale are so shrouded in the mists of the Bronze Age that they feel more like a dream than a historical record. Yet the consequences of that dream are written across the face of our modern world. It's a strange and unsettling thought that so much of who we are now can be traced back to a single family's strange and uncertain journey into the unknown. A journey we are about to retrace together, step by dusty step. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's a nice way to feel connected as we drift back into the past. Let me know in the comments. Our story then begins with the smell of baked clay and dusty reeds, with the bleating of sheep and the low hum of 1,000 conversations in a language that no longer exists. We find ourselves in the city of Ur, a jewel of southern Mesopotamia, nestled between the life-giving waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. This is no simple village of mud huts. Ur is a metropolis of staggering sophistication. A colossal mountain-like temple, a ziggurat, dominates the skyline, its tiers reaching for the heavens in honor of the moon god Nana. The streets below are a labyrinth of two-story homes, bustling markets, and scribal schools where students learn to press wedge-shaped marks into wet clay tablets, recording everything from grain receipts to epic poems about heroic gods and catastrophic floods. It is a world of stability, of tradition, a place where your identity is welded to your city, your family, and your pantheon of very busy and often very moody deities. In one of the finer brick houses lives a man named Abram, son of Terah. He is not a king, not a priest, not a great warrior. He is a man of considerable means, a prosperous patriarch of a semi-nomadic clan. But by the standards of Ur, he is unremarkable. He lives with his wife, Sarai, a woman of arresting beauty, whose heart carries a quiet, persistent ache. She is barren. In a culture where children, especially sons, are a man's legacy and a woman's primary value, this is not just a personal sadness. It is a mark of divine disfavor, a cosmic dead end. Also in this household is his nephew, Lot, his brother's orphaned son. They live under the authority of Abram's father, Terah, following the rhythms of their city and their culture, honoring the gods their ancestors honored. And then, the voice. The narrative doesn't describe a clap of thunder or a blinding light. It is presented as a simple, stark command from a god Abram has likely never heard of. A deity with no statue in the great temple, no festival in his name. This god, who calls himself Yahweh, speaks a command that is, frankly, insane. Go from your country, your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. Think about that for a moment. It's not just a call to move. It is a demand to sever every cord of identity. Leave your nation. Leave your extended family. Even leave your father's immediate authority. Abandon every ounce of security, every tradition, every relationship that defines you, and just walk. Walk where? To the land I will show you. He doesn't even get a map, not even a decent set of directions scribbled on a potsherd. It's the ultimate trust fall, and it comes with an equally audacious set of promises. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. A great nation from a man with a barren wife. It's so ludicrous, it borders on a cosmic joke. Historians still argue whether a single individual named Abram actually walked these paths, or if he represents the archetypal memory of tribal migrations that occurred during the Middle Bronze Age. But for the story, and for the man at its heart, the debate is irrelevant. The call is real. Terah, the family patriarch, seems to have been convinced, or perhaps just worn down by his son's sudden, inexplicable obsession. He gathers his family, Abram, Sarai, Lot, and they pack up their tents, their servants, their flocks of sheep and goats, and leave the magnificent city of Ur behind. They head north, following the well-trodden trade routes along the Fertile Crescent, a great arc of civilization. But they don't go all the way. They stop in a city called Haran, in what is now modern-day Turkey. It's a comfortable place, a major hub of commerce and culture, not so different from Ur. Perhaps the journey was too much for the elderly Terah. Perhaps the comfort of another city was too tempting. For whatever reason, they settle. And it is in Haran that Terah lives out the rest of his days and dies. For a moment, it seems the great adventure has stalled before it truly began. But after his father's death, the voice returns to Abram, now the undisputed head of the clan. The command is the same, the promises are the same, and so, at the ripe old age of 75, an age when most men were preparing for a quiet burial, Abram does what he was told to do years before. He gathers Sarai, Lot, and every possession and soul they have acquired, and turns his back on the last bastion of urban civilization he will know for a very long time. He turns south, toward a land called Canaan. This time, there is no stopping. He leads his caravan of people and animals into a territory that is not his. A land inhabited by a patchwork of peoples with their own cities, their own kings, and their own gods. He arrives not as a conqueror, but as an immigrant, a resident alien with a flock of sheep and a strange story about a private god. He moves through the central hill country, stopping at a place called Shechem, near a great tree. There, he builds a simple altar of uncut stones. He does the same later, at a place between Bethel and Ai. These altars are not grand temples. They are simple, rugged markers on the landscape. Abram's way of saying, in this foreign place, filled with foreign gods, my God is here. He is mapping his faith onto the very soil of this new and not entirely welcoming land, clinging to a promise of a future that seems, from every logical standpoint, utterly impossible. This land of promise, however, wasn't exactly a garden of earthly delights. Soon after Abram arrives, the sky clams up, the rains refuse to fall, and the earth turns to cracked, brittle dust. A famine grips the region, withering the grazing lands and threatening the survival of his vast flocks. So much for the land of milk and honey. In a move that will become something of a family habit, Abram decides to head toward the one place in the ancient world that always had food, thanks to the reliable flooding of its great river, Egypt. But as he approaches this ancient and powerful kingdom, a very human fear grips him. He looks at his wife, Sarai, whose beauty has not faded with the years, and a cold calculation enters his mind. He imagines the powerful Egyptian lords seeing her, killing him, and taking her for themselves, so he hatches a plan, a rather cowardly and self-serving one. "Say you are my sister," he tells her, "so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." It's not exactly a ringing endorsement of his faith in his new God's protection. And just as he feared, Sarai is noticed. She's taken into the very household of Pharaoh. And Abram, a supposed brother, is showered with gifts: sheep, cattle, donkeys, servants. He gets rich, but at a terrible cost to his integrity. This whole "she's my sister" routine is so awkward you can almost feel the second-hand embarrassment across 4,000 years. The plan, however, backfires spectacularly. Yahweh, Abram's patron deity, is not pleased with this arrangement and sends severe plagues upon Pharaoh and his household. A terrified and furious Pharaoh summons Abram, demanding to know why he lied. The patriarch is unceremoniously booted out of Egypt, along with his wife and all the livestock he'd just been given. They return to Canaan, significantly wealthier, but with Abram having learned a humbling lesson about the perils of trying to outsmart his own destiny. Back in the hills of Canaan, a new problem arises: success. Both Abram's and his nephew Lot's flocks have grown so large that the land can no longer support them both. Their shepherds quarrel over grazing rights and watering holes. Abram, showing a wisdom he lacked in Egypt, offers Lot the first choice of the land. Lot looks down from the hills and sees the lush, green, well-watered plain of the Jordan, like the garden of the Lord, and chooses it, settling his tents near the city of Sodom. Abram is left with the drier, more rugged hill country. It seems like a bad deal, but it places a crucial distance between his family and the notoriously corrupt cities of the plain. Years pass. The promise of a great nation still feels hollow. Abram is old, Sarah is old, and the nursery tent remains empty. In a deeply moving and mysterious nighttime ritual, God formalizes his promise, his covenant with Abram. Abram arranges the carcasses of several animals, slicing them in two. As darkness falls, he enters a trance, and a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch, symbols of the divine presence, pass between the pieces. This was the ancient world's equivalent of signing a contract in blood, a self-maledictory oath. The deity was essentially saying, "If I do not keep my promise to you, may I become like these divided animals." And the promise is made explicit. Abram will have a son, an heir from his own body. But Sarah's patience has run out. She resorts to a common custom of the time, giving her Egyptian handmaiden, Hagar, to her husband. "Perhaps I can build a family through her," she says, her words heavy with resignation. Hagar conceives, and the dynamic in the camp instantly curdles with jealousy and contempt. Hagar, now carrying the master's child, looks down on the barren Sarah, and Sarah, in her pain, deals harshly with her. Hagar flees into the desert, where she has her own divine encounter and is told to return, receiving a promise that her son, Ishmael, will also be the father of a great people. More years pass. Ishmael is a teenager. Abram is 99. It seems the matter of the heir is settled. But then, three mysterious strangers appear at his tent during the heat of the day. Abram offers them lavish hospitality, and one of them makes a stunning pronouncement. I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Inside the tent, Sarah, now 90 years old, overhears this and lets out a short, bitter laugh. A son, at her age. It's beyond absurd. It is here that their names are changed, a sign of their new destiny. Abram becomes Abraham, father of a multitude, and Sarai becomes Sarah, princess. And just as the stranger promised, against all laws of biology and reason, Sarah conceives and gives birth to a son. They name him Isaac, which means he laughs, forever immortalizing Sarah's moment of disbelief, now transformed into pure joy. The line of the promise now has its heir. But this line is nearly extinguished in the single most harrowing episode of Abraham's life, the binding of Isaac. The command comes without explanation. Take your son, your only son, the one you love, and offer him as a sacrifice. Abraham obeys, a silent 3-day journey of unimaginable anguish, culminating on a mountain with a terrified boy and a father with a raised knife. At the last possible second, a divine messenger stays his hand. It is a terrible and enigmatic test of faith, one that has been debated for centuries, forever marking the relationship between this family and its demanding God. The torch is passed. Isaac grows and marries Rebekah, who, in a familiar echo of the past, is also barren for 20 years before she gives birth to twin boys. Esau, the firstborn, a rugged, hairy hunter and his father's favorite, and Jacob, a quiet, smooth-skinned man who preferred the camp, his mother's favorite. The sibling rivalry is intense from the moment they are born. In the ancient Near East, the firstborn son was entitled to the birthright, which often included a double portion of the inheritance and leadership of the family. Esau, however, wears this privilege lightly. One day, he stumbles in from the hunt, ravenous, and sells his entire birthright to Jacob for a single bowl of red lentil stew. It is a shocking act of short-sightedness that Jacob ruthlessly exploits. The deception deepens when Isaac is old and blind. Rebekah orchestrates a plot for Jacob to steal the blessing meant for Esau. She covers Jacob's arms and neck with goatskins to mimic his brother's hairiness, and Jacob, trembling, lies to his father's face, receiving the irrevocable patriarchal blessing of prosperity and dominion. When Esau discovers the treachery, his grief turns to murderous rage, and Jacob is forced to flee for his life, running back to the ancestral homeland in Haran. There, the deceiver gets a taste of his own medicine. He falls in love with his beautiful cousin Rachel, but his sly uncle Laban tricks him into marrying her older sister, Leah, first. What follows is a masterclass in family dysfunction, a domestic drama that could rival any modern reality show. Jacob is stuck with two wives who despise each other, competing fiercely to give him sons. When they can't conceive, they give Jacob the handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah, adding two more women to the parental equation. Out of this tangled, jealous, and heartbreaking mess, 12 sons are born. But Jacob makes the same mistake his father did. He picks a favorite. Joseph, the firstborn son of his beloved Rachel, is showered with affection, symbolized by a magnificent, richly ornamented coat. This blatant favoritism poisons his brothers' hearts with a venomous envy that finally boils over. One day, they see Joseph approaching them in the fields, the dreamer in his fancy coat, and they seize him, strip him, and throw him into a dry cistern before deciding it's more profitable to sell him as a slave to a passing caravan heading down to, of all places, Egypt. The caravan carrying the heartbroken 17-year-old moves south, away from everything he has ever known. For a shepherd boy from the dusty hills of Canaan, the arrival in Egypt is a sensory explosion. He is surrounded by a symphony of overwhelming sights and sounds. Colossal temples etched with cryptic figures, statues of inscrutable animal-headed gods, and everywhere, the great glittering serpent of the Nile, the lifeblood of a civilization that seemed as ancient and eternal as the stars. The sheer scale of it all, the pyramids piercing the sky in the distance, the teeming, disciplined crowds, the monumental architecture, is designed to make a person feel small and insignificant. And Joseph is less than insignificant. He is property. On an auction block in this bewildering foreign land, he is sold to a man named Potiphar, who happens to be the captain of Pharaoh's personal guard. It's a high-ranking household, and for a slave, it could have been a life of misery and abuse. But Joseph possesses a quiet competence, a Midas touch that seems to follow him even in his despair. Whatever task he is given, it prospers. The ledgers balance, the harvests increase. The household runs with an uncanny smoothness. Potiphar, a military man who could certainly recognize talent and efficiency, notices. He promotes the young Hebrew again and again, until Joseph, the foreign slave, is entrusted with the management of his entire estate. He has gone from a bit in the ground to a position of immense trust, with only his master above him. For a time, it seems his fortune has turned, but his rapid rise, coupled with his handsome appearance, attracts a dangerous kind of attention. Potiphar's wife begins to look at him with an inviting hunger. She propositions him, not once, but day after day. Joseph, however, is resolute. He refuses her advances, not just out of fear, but out of a deep loyalty to the master who has trusted him. "How could I do such a wicked thing," he says, "and sin against God?" His integrity proves to be his undoing. One day, when no one else is in the house, she corners him, grabbing his outer garment. Joseph does the only thing he can. He slips out of the cloak and flees, left holding the evidence of his presence. Her desire curdles into vengeful fury. She summons the household servants, weaving a story of a brazen assault by the Hebrew slave, holding up his abandoned cloak as proof. When Potiphar returns home, she feeds him the same poisonous lie. Consumed by rage and public humiliation, Potiphar has Joseph arrested and thrown into the state prison, the very place where the king's enemies were held. From the height of power in a great house, he plunges back into the darkness. Yet even here, in a place of filth and despair, Joseph's character shines through. He doesn't wallow or curse his fate. He simply gets to work. The chief jailer, much like Potiphar before him, sees the young man's skill and integrity, and before long, puts Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. It's almost comical. No matter how far he falls, Joseph keeps ending up in middle management. He is running the very prison in which he is incarcerated. Some time later, two new inmates arrive, men who had fallen from the pinnacle of royal favor, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and his chief baker. One morning, Joseph finds them looking unusually dejected. They've both had deeply disturbing dreams and have no one to interpret them. Joseph offers to listen, with the careful preface that interpretations belong to God. The cupbearer recounts a dream of a vine with three branches that bud, blossom, and produce grapes, which he then presses into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph's interpretation is swift and hopeful. In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore him to his position. The baker then eagerly shares his own dream of 3 baskets of bread on his head, which birds came and ate. The meaning of this dream is grim. In 3 days, Pharaoh will have him executed. 3 days later, it all comes true, exactly as Joseph had foretold. The baker is killed, and the cupbearer is restored to his place at Pharaoh's right hand. Before he left, Joseph had made one desperate plea. When all is well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. But the cupbearer, now back in the dazzling light of the court, surrounded by luxury and power, does what people so often do. He forgets. It's the kind of epic level forgetting you have to respect. Sort of like misplacing your keys. If your keys were a person languishing in a dungeon. For 2 more full years, Joseph waits in that prison, his one glimmer of hope extinguished. Then, Pharaoh himself begins to lose sleep. He has 2 vivid, terrifying dreams. In the first, 7 sleek, fat cows emerge from the Nile, only to be devoured by 7 ugly, gaunt cows who remain just as gaunt as before. In the second, 7 healthy, full heads of grain are swallowed up by 7 thin, scorched heads of grain. He awakens deeply troubled and summons every magician and wise man in Egypt. But none can offer a convincing interpretation. It is only then, in the ensuing panic, that a light bulb goes off in the cup-bearer's head. He remembers the Hebrew in the prison. Immediately, Joseph is summoned. He is rushed from his cell, shaved and given fresh clothes, and then stands, blinking in the light, before the living God, King of Egypt. He is humble, but firm. I cannot do it, he tells Pharaoh. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. He listens to the dreams, and the interpretation flows from him with divine clarity. The 7 good cows and good heads of grain are 7 years of unprecedented abundance that will come upon Egypt. The 7 gaunt cows and scorched heads of grain are 7 years of devastating famine that will follow, so severe that the years of plenty will be completely forgotten. But Joseph doesn't stop at the diagnosis. He offers a prescription. He lays out a brilliant, nationwide administrative plan. Pharaoh should appoint a discerning and wise man to oversee the land, organize a bureaucracy to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 good years, and store the grain in state-run granaries. This strategic reserve would be the salvation of Egypt when the famine hits. Pharaoh and his officials are stunned into silence by the sheer wisdom and foresight of this foreign prisoner. Pharaoh looks at his court and says, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" The decision is immediate. He turns to Joseph and elevates him from prisoner to prime minister on the spot. Since God has made all this known to you, Pharaoh declares, I hereby put you in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. He places his own signet ring on Joseph's finger, dresses him in robes of fine linen, puts a gold chain around his neck, and gives him a new Egyptian name. The shepherd boy sold into slavery, who began the day in a dungeon, ends it as the second most powerful man on the face of the earth, holding the fate of the entire Egyptian empire in his hands. For 7 years, as Joseph had foreseen, the land of Egypt produces an impossible abundance. The harvests are so vast that Joseph's scribes eventually stopped trying to record the amount of grain being brought into the royal store cities. It is as measureless as the sand of the sea. During this time, Joseph, now fully assimilated into the Egyptian elite, marries Asenath, the daughter of a high priest, and she gives him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. He is a man at the peak of his power, his past life in Canaan a distant, fading memory. Then, just as predicted, the years of plenty come to an abrupt end. The famine takes hold, withering fields not just in Egypt, but across the known world. The storehouses of every other nation are empty. Only Egypt, thanks to the foresight of the Hebrew vizier, has bread. The doors to the granaries are opened, and the world comes to Egypt to buy food. Back in Canaan, the patriarch Jacob and his sprawling family are starving. The old man, hearing that there is grain in Egypt, sends 10 of his sons to purchase supplies. He keeps his youngest, Benjamin, at home, pathologically protective of the only other son of his beloved Rachel, terrified of losing him as he lost Joseph. So the 10 brothers make the long journey, and eventually they find themselves in the court of the formidable Egyptian official in charge of all grain sales. They bow low before him, their faces to the ground, completely oblivious that they are prostrating themselves before the very brother they sold into bondage 2 decades earlier. Joseph's childhood dream is fulfilled in the most ironic way imaginable. He recognizes them instantly, but his face remains an inscrutable mask of power. He decides to test them. Have these violent, jealous men changed at all? Speaking harshly through an interpreter, he accuses them of being spies. They frantically try to explain themselves, telling him about their old father and their youngest brother back home. Joseph seizes on this. He throws them in jail for 3 days, then releases them on one condition. They must return with this youngest brother to prove their story. To ensure their compliance, he keeps one of them, Simeon, as a hostage. He then secretly has their money placed back in their sacks of grain, a move designed to further disorient and frighten them. They return to Canaan and tell their story to Jacob, who is plunged into grief. You are depriving me of my children, he cries. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. He flatly refuses to let Benjamin go. But the famine is relentless. Their supplies run out. Finally, Judah, the very brother who had suggested selling Joseph in the first place, steps forward and makes a solemn vow, pledging his own life as security for Benjamin's. With a heavy heart, Jacob relents. The brothers return to Egypt, this time with Benjamin. When Joseph sees his younger brother, his only full brother, he is overcome with emotion and has to leave the room to weep in private. He composes himself and invites them all to a banquet at his home. The brothers are terrified, convinced they're being lured into a trap over the money from the first trip. At the meal, he unnerves them completely by seating them in their precise birth order, something a stranger could never know. It's the most awkward family dinner in history. To test them further, he lavishes attention on Benjamin, giving him 5 times the portion of anyone else. Watching for any flicker of the old jealousy, he sees none. For his final masterstroke, he has his personal silver divination cup hidden in Benjamin's sack of grain. The next morning, as they head for home, his steward overtakes them and accuses them of theft. The cup is found, and they are all dragged back in shame to face the vizier's wrath. Joseph declares that the guilty one, Benjamin, must remain in Egypt as his slave. This is the ultimate test. Would they abandon Rachel's other son as they had abandoned him? It is Judah who speaks, and his words are a world away from the callous man he once was. He delivers a moving speech, describing his father's grief and his personal vow, and then he offers himself in Benjamin's place. Let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, he pleads. This act of profound self-sacrifice is the proof Joseph has been waiting for. The dam of his composure finally breaks. He sends all his Egyptian attendants out of the room, and in a torrent of uncontrollable sobs, he reveals himself. I am Joseph, he cries out to his stunned, terrified brothers. Is my father still alive? Their fear turns to astonishment as he pulls them close, weeping, explaining that what they intended for evil, God had used for good, to save their entire family and much of the world. The news reaches Pharaoh, who is delighted and insists that Joseph's entire family move to Egypt. He provides wagons, supplies, and the best land in the country, a fertile region in the Nile Delta called Goshen. And so, Jacob, whose name is now Israel, leads his entire clan of 70 people down into Egypt. The reunion between the old, frail patriarch and the son he had mourned for dead is one of the most poignant moments in their entire saga. The family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is safe. They settle in Goshen, and as honored guests of the vizier's family, they thrive. They are fruitful and multiply exceedingly, becoming a nation within a nation. Joseph lives to a ripe old age, as do his brothers. Generations pass. The memory of the great famine fades. The story of the Hebrew who saved Egypt becomes just that, a story. Then comes the critical turning point in the narrative, a single, ominous sentence. Then a new king, who did not know Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Historians still argue about the identity of this pharaoh, but many suggest he represented a new dynasty of native Egyptians, the New Kingdom, who had violently expelled a line of Semitic rulers known as the Hyksos. This new leadership would have been deeply suspicious of the large Semitic population flourishing in their delta region. The new pharaoh looks at the Hebrews, and he does not see the family of a national hero. He sees a rapidly growing foreign population, a potential fifth column. Look, he says to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. The policy of hospitality is replaced by a policy of oppression. The Hebrews are stripped of their rights and forced into slavery. They are put under the command of ruthless taskmasters and compelled to build massive store cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramesses, hauling mud and making bricks under the scorching Egyptian sun. The work is brutal, designed to break their bodies and their spirits. But a strange thing happens. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. And the more they multiplied, the more the Egyptians dreaded them, driving them even more ruthlessly, until the memory of Goshen was just a cruel dream, and the crack of the whip was the only reality they knew. Pharaoh's plan to control the Hebrew population through forced labor has backfired spectacularly. All the mud bricks and mortar have produced is a stronger, more numerous, and more resilient people. His paranoia deepens. He moves from economic oppression to a far darker strategy, one whispered in the secret halls of power. He summons the two-head Hebrew midwives, women named Shipra and Puah, and gives them a chilling direct order. When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. It is a decree of secret, state-sponsored genocide. But the midwives find themselves caught between the command of the most powerful man on earth and a higher, more ancient authority. They fear God more than they fear Pharaoh. In a quiet, courageous act of mass civil disobedience, they ignore the edict and let the boys live. When Pharaoh calls them to account, they don't panic. They present him with a brilliantly creative excuse, one that plays on Egyptian stereotypes of the Hebrews as being rustic and almost animal-like in their vitality. Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, they say with a straight face. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. It's such a perfect piece of bureaucratic buck-passing that Pharaoh is left speechless. You have to admire the sheer nerve of it. Frustrated and his secret plan exposed, Pharaoh abandons all subtlety. He makes his murderous decree public, issuing it to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, he commands, you must throw into the Nile, the great river, the source of all life and fertility in Egypt. The very body of the god Hapi is to be turned into a mass grave for the children of Israel. It is into this world of terror and state-sanctioned murder that a child is born to a man and woman from the tribe of Levi. The mother looks at her newborn son and sees that he is a goodly child, beautiful and special. She cannot bring herself to obey the death sentence. For 3 months, she hides him, muffling every cry, her heart pounding with every footstep that passes their door. But a growing baby cannot be hidden forever. Her desperation gives birth to a daring plan. She takes a papyrus basket, weaving it tightly and waterproofing it with tar and pitch, creating a tiny ark. She places her son inside, carries him down to the river's edge, and gently sets the basket afloat among the thick reeds, praying that it will not tip or be discovered by crocodiles or by the Egyptian patrols. The baby's older sister, a young girl named Miriam, hides herself at a distance, a silent, terrified guardian, to see what will become of him, as fate, or perhaps a grander design, would have it. A royal procession makes its way to that very spot on the river. Pharaoh's own daughter has come down to bathe. She notices the strange basket in the reeds and sends her slave girl to retrieve it. She opens it and finds the baby, crying. Her heart is moved with compassion. She knows immediately what this is. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she says. At that precise moment, Miriam chooses to reveal herself, stepping forward with a display of courage that belies her age. Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? She asked the princess. The princess, who has just decided to defy her own father's edict, agrees. And so Miriam runs and brings back the only woman for the job, the baby's own mother. In a breathtaking twist of irony, the child's mother is hired by the Egyptian state to nurse her own son, the son whom that same state had condemned to death. The child is given the Egyptian name Moses, which sounds like the Hebrew for to draw out, because, as the princess says, I drew him out of the water. He is raised for his first few years by his own family, absorbing his language, his culture, his identity as a Hebrew. Then, once weaned, he is taken to the royal court to be raised as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. While it may seem extraordinary, the adoption of foreign children into the royal household was a known practice in New Kingdom Egypt, a way to build loyalty and influence among subject peoples. Moses is given the finest education Egypt has to offer. Schooled in reading, writing, mathematics, and military strategy, he walks the halls of power, a prince of the empire, but under his fine linen robes beats the heart of a slave. This dual identity creates a conflict that finally erupts when he is a grown man. He goes out to see his people, to witness their suffering firsthand. He sees an Egyptian taskmaster brutally beating a Hebrew slave. A lifetime of suppressed rage boils to the surface. He glances around, and seeing no one, he strikes the Egyptian and kills him, burying the body in the sand. In that single, violent act, he has made his choice. He has cast his lot with the oppressed, not the oppressor. But his secret doesn't last long. The next day, he sees two Hebrews fighting and tries to intervene, only to be rebuffed with a sneer. Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? The blood runs cold in his veins. The story is out. Soon the news reaches Pharaoh, and the privileged prince becomes a fugitive, wanted for murder. Moses flees for his life, escaping Egypt and disappearing into the vast, silent wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. He eventually finds his way to the land of Midian, where he stops at a well. There, he defends a group of 7 sisters from aggressive shepherds, an act of chivalry that earns him an invitation to the home of their father, a Midianite priest named Jethro. Moses, the former prince, the fugitive, settles into a new life. He marries one of the daughters, Zipporah, has a son, and becomes a shepherd, embracing a quiet, anonymous existence. He spends 40 years in this self-imposed exile, a remarkably long and humbling career change. The pampered prince of Egypt learns the rhythms of the desert, the habits of sheep, the names of the stars. The fire and ambition of his youth seem to have been baked out of him by the desert sun, replaced by the patience and solitude of a shepherd. One day, now an 80-year-old man, he leads his flock to the far side of the wilderness, to the base of Mount Horeb, known as the Mountain of God. There, he sees something that defies all explanation. A desert shrub, a common thorn bush, is engulfed in a brilliant flame, yet its leaves and branches are not burning up. It is on fire. but it is not consumed. He turns aside for a closer look at this impossible sight. As he does, a voice, deep and resonant, calls to him from the heart of the fire. Moses, Moses. It is the God of his ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He has seen the suffering of his people, heard their cries, and he has come to deliver them. And Moses, the fugitive, the murderer, the forgotten old shepherd with a stammer, is the one he has chosen to go back to Egypt and confront the most powerful empire on earth. His quiet life is over. Standing before the impossible fire, Moses, the 80-year-old shepherd, is not exactly brimming with heroic confidence. He is terrified, and he begins to make excuses, producing a list of objections so relatable. He could be the patron saint of anyone who has ever tried to get out of a difficult assignment. First, he pleads inadequacy. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? God's answer is simple and profound. I will be with you. Then he asks for credentials. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? The voice from the fire gives an answer that has echoed through millennia. A name that is both a statement and a mystery. I am who I am. A declaration of pure, eternal being. Next, Moses worries about credibility. What if they do not believe me or listen to me? In response, God gives him 3 signs. His shepherd's staff transforms into a snake and back again. His hand becomes leprous and is instantly healed. And he is told that the water he takes from the Nile will turn to blood on the ground. Even with these miracles at his command, Moses tries one more time, pleading incompetence. Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue. It is a raw, honest admission of his own limitations. God's response is a gentle but firm reminder of who is actually in charge, who gave human beings their mouths. Now go, I will help you speak. Finally, having exhausted all other options, Moses just begs, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. At this, a flicker of divine anger is kindled, but it is tempered with a practical concession. God informs him that his older brother, Aaron, is already on his way to meet him. Aaron the Levite is an eloquent speaker. He will be Moses' mouthpiece. The excuses have run out. So Moses returns to his father-in-law, takes his wife and sons, and heads back toward Egypt, the land that holds his death warrant. He meets Aaron in the wilderness, and together they go to the elders of the Hebrews. Aaron speaks, Moses performs the signs, and for the first time in centuries, a spark of hope ignites among the slaves. They believe, they bow down and worship. The first step is a success. The second is a catastrophe. Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh, a new Pharaoh, likely the son or grandson of the one Moses fled. Their demand, as instructed, is deceptively modest. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh's reply is dripping with the arrogance of a man who believes he is a living God. Who is the Lord, he sneers, that I should obey him? I do not know this Lord, and I will not let Israel go. To prove his point, he punishes the entire slave population for this impertinence. He orders his taskmasters to stop supplying straw, for the brick making, while demanding the same daily quota. The people are scattered, desperately trying to gather stubble, and when they fail to meet the impossible quota, their own foremen are brutally beaten. The mission has made everything worse. The people's hope curdles into bitter resentment, and they turn on Moses, who is left utterly crushed. What follows is not a negotiation. It is a war, a cosmic duel waged between the God of the Hebrews and the entire pantheon of Egypt, with the hardened heart of Pharaoh as the battlefield. Aaron throws down his staff, and it becomes a snake. Pharaoh's magicians do the same with their secret arts, but Aaron's snake swallows theirs. It's an impressive opening act, but Pharaoh is unmoved, and so the plagues begin, a series of devastating, surgically precise assaults on the sources of Egyptian power and faith. Historians and scientists have long debated whether the plagues could reflect a catastrophic chain of natural events, perhaps a volcanic eruption triggering a massive ecological collapse. But in the narrative, they are divine acts of war. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, turns to blood, killing the fish and creating a horrific stench, a direct insult to the river gods. Then come swarms of frogs, a mockery of the fertility goddess Heket. Then clouds of gnats and swarms of flies. Crucially, from the fourth plague onward, a distinction is made. The land of Goshen, where the Hebrews live, is miraculously spared. The assault intensifies, moving from deeply unpleasant to economically ruinous. A pestilence kills Egypt's livestock in the field, but not the livestock of the Hebrews. Painful, festering boils break out on every Egyptian. Then comes a storm of unimaginable fury, a supernatural tempest of hail and fire that shatters trees and flattens the crops. After each blow, Pharaoh's behavior falls into a predictable, almost comical pattern. He summons Moses, admits he has sinned, begs for the plague to stop, and promises to let the people go. But the moment the pressure is off, his heart hardens again. After the hail, what little is left in the fields is devoured by an all-consuming blanket of locusts. Then comes the most psychologically terrifying plague of all. A profound, suffocating darkness settles over Egypt for 3 days. It is a darkness that can be felt, a primal blackness that smothers every torch and lamp, a direct humiliation of Ra, the mighty sun god himself. While all of Egypt is plunged into blind terror, the Israelites have light in their dwellings. Enraged and humiliated, Pharaoh gives Moses a final warning. Get out of my sight. The day you see my face again, you will die. Moses delivers his own final warning in return. There is one more plague coming, one that will finally break the will of Egypt. At midnight, the Lord will pass through the land, and every firstborn son will die. As this final, terrible judgment looms, Moses instructs his people in a new ritual. Each family is to take an unblemished year-old lamb, slaughter it, and paint its blood on the lintel and doorposts of their homes. They are to roast the lamb and eat it in a hurry, with their cloaks tucked in, sandals on their feet, and staff in hand, ready to leave at a moment's notice. This is the Passover, the sign for the angel of death to pass over their houses. That night, as the Hebrews eat their hurried, hopeful meal, a terrifying wail echoes through the land of Egypt. The plague strikes with horrifying precision, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn of the captive in the dungeon. There is not a house without someone dead. Broken Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron in the dead of night, and all but throws them out of the country. The terrified Egyptian populace showers the Hebrews with gold, silver, and clothing, desperate to be rid of them. And so, after 430 years, they march out of Egypt, a chaotic, triumphant column of 600,000 men, plus women and children, their unleavened dough on their backs. But their freedom is not yet won. As soon as they are gone, Pharaoh's grief turns to rage. He has a change of heart for the last time. He marshals his army, his elite chariots, and pursues them. The Israelites find themselves trapped, the sea before them, the dust cloud of the world's most powerful army rising behind them. Panic erupts, but Moses, his voice now ringing with authority, tells them to be still and watch the salvation of the Lord. A great pillar of cloud and fire moves between the Hebrews and the Egyptians, plunging the pursuers into darkness. Moses raises his staff over the water, and a strong east wind begins to blow, parting the sea of reeds, piling the water into liquid walls on either side, and creating a path of dry land. All night, the Israelites cross. As dawn breaks, the Egyptians charge after them into the seabed, but their chariot wheels become clogged. At God's command, Moses stretches out his hand again, and the walls of water collapse, drowning the entire army of Egypt. As the sun rises, the Israelites stand on the far shore, truly free, looking back at the bodies of their pursuers washing up on the sand. On the far shore of the sea, a song of triumph, led by Miriam with her tambourine, echoes into the morning sky. The entire Egyptian army is gone, swallowed by the waters. The Israelites are free. It is a moment of pure, ecstatic relief. But this euphoria lasts about as long as it takes for the sun to get high in the sky and for their water skins to run dry. They are now in the wilderness of Shur, a vast, bleached landscape of rock and shimmering heat. Freedom, they quickly discover, is hungry and thirsty work. After 3 days with no water, they find an oasis at a place called Mara. But their relief turns to disgust as they discover the water is bitter and undrinkable. Immediately, the grumbling begins, a sound that will become the persistent background music of their journey. "What are we to drink?" they cry to Moses. It seems they invented the phrase, "Are we there yet?" millennia before the family road trip. God directs Moses to a piece of wood, which he throws into the pool, and the water miraculously becomes sweet. A crisis is averted, but a pattern is set. A little further on, their food runs out. The complaining intensifies, now tinged with a shockingly short-term nostalgia. "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt," they wail. "There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted." They have been free for a matter of weeks, and they are already romanticizing their slavery. In response, God provides in a way that is designed to teach them daily dependence. In the evenings, a flock of quail descends on the camp, providing meat. And in the morning, when the dew evaporates, the ground is covered with a thin, flaky substance, like frost. "Man who?" they ask one another, which means, "What is it?" And so it gets its name, manna. It tastes like wafers made with honey, and the rules for gathering it are strict. They are to take only enough for one day. Any more will spoil. On the sixth day, they are to gather a double portion, because none will appear on the seventh, the Sabbath day of rest. It is a daily lesson in trust. Their trust, however, proves to be a fragile thing. At their next camp, there is no water at all, and the grumbling escalates to the point of open rebellion. The people are on the verge of stoning Moses. A desperate Moses cries out to God, who instructs him to take the elders and his staff and strike a particular rock on Mount Horeb. Moses obeys, and a torrent of water gushes forth from the solid rock. Just as their thirst is quenched, they face their first human enemy. A nomadic tribe, the Amalekites, attacks their rear flank. Moses appoints a young man named Joshua to lead the fight, while he, his brother Aaron, and a man named Hur go to the top of a nearby hill. What follows is a strange, symbolic battle. As long as Moses holds his staff aloft in his hands, Joshua and the Israelites prevail on the battlefield below. But his arms grow heavy, and as they begin to fall, the Amalekites gain the upper hand. So Aaron and Hur have him sit on a stone, and they stand on either side of him, holding his arms up until the sun sets and the battle is won. The victory belongs not to their military might, but to their leader's endurance as a conduit for divine power. Finally, 3 months after leaving Egypt, the entire nation arrives at the foot of a formidable, jagged peak rising from the desert floor, Mount Sinai. Here, they make their camp. The journey of survival is about to become a journey of identity. God calls Moses up the mountain and offers a covenant. "If you obey me fully," the voice says, "then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." It is a proposal, an invitation to a unique relationship. Moses relays the message, and the people respond in unison. "We will do everything the Lord has said." What follows is 3 days of intense, solemn preparation. The people must wash themselves and their clothes. Moses sets a boundary around the base of the mountain, warning that any person or animal who even touches it will be put to death. The air grows thick with anticipation and a holy dread. On the morning of the third day, it begins. A thick cloud descends upon the mountain, shot through with terrifying flashes of lightning. The sound of a ram's horn, a shofar, blasts through the air, growing louder and louder. The ground itself begins to tremble violently. The entire mountain is shrouded in smoke, as if it were a colossal furnace, because the Lord has descended upon it in fire. The people, standing at a distance, are paralyzed with terror. From the heart of this deafening, earth-shaking spectacle of fire and smoke, the voice of God speaks, proclaiming the 10 great principles of the covenant, the Decalogue. These are not suggestions, they are commands, carved into the very structure of this new nation's reality. The first 4 define their relationship with the divine. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy." The next 6 define their relationships with each other, forming the bedrock of a just society. "Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. You shall not covet." The direct experience of the divine is too much for them. The people, trembling, fall back and beg Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." This moment solidifies Moses' role as the indispensable mediator, the one man who can stand in the gap between the terrifying holiness of God and the profound fragility of humanity. Moses then goes up the mountain and receives a more detailed set of laws, dealing with everything from slavery and personal injury to property rights and social justice. While many of these case laws have parallels in other ancient law codes, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, the Israelite version is unique for its consistent concern for the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner. When Moses returns and reads these laws to the people, they again agree to obey. He builds an altar and 12 stone pillars for the 12 tribes, and in a solemn ceremony, he sprinkles the blood of sacrificed oxen on the altar and on the people, declaring, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you." With this visceral act, the covenant is sealed. Now, finally, Moses is called to the summit one last time. He is to ascend into the fiery cloud, alone, for 40 days and 40 nights, to receive the law inscribed on tablets of stone by the very finger of God. As he disappears into the smoke, the fledgling nation is left to wait, camped at the base of a mountain that still smolders with the embers of divinity. Moses is gone. For days that stretch into weeks, he remains hidden in the fiery cloud that shrouds the peak of Mount Sinai. Down in the camp, the people wait. The terrifying thunder has ceased, the lightning has faded, and the awesome spectacle that had held them in thrall is now just a smoldering mountain and a silent sky. Anxious murmurs begin to ripple through the tents. Where is Moses? As the fire consumed him. 40 days is, apparently, the absolute limit for waiting for your divine legal code to be delivered. Their newfound faith, forged in terror and spectacle, proves to be terrifyingly thin. They need something they can see, something tangible. A delegation approaches Aaron, their frustration boiling over. "Come, make us gods who will go before us," they demand. "As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." In a moment of staggering moral collapse, Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses, gives in to the pressure. He instructs them to bring him their gold earrings, and from this treasure, he melts down the gold and fashions it into the image of a young bull, a golden calf. It was a familiar symbol, echoing the bull god Apis from Egypt, and the bull imagery associated with Canaanite deities of strength and fertility. It was a comfortable, visible, controllable god. Aaron builds an altar before it and makes a proclamation that is a masterpiece of spiritual treason. "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." The next day, they hold a festival. There are burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, followed by a wild, unrestrained revelry that slips into pagan chaos. At the very foot of the mountain, where they had sworn allegiance to an invisible god, they are now dancing around a golden idol of their own making. Up on the summit, God sees everything. His anger blazes with a terrifying intensity. "Go down," he tells Moses, "because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt." He declares his intention to destroy them completely and to start a new, greater nation from Moses alone. But Moses in a breathtaking act of courage, stands in the gap. He doesn't accept the offer. Instead, he intercedes for his people. He appeals not to God's mercy, but to his reputation and his promises. What will the Egyptians think? He argues, imagining them sneering that this God led his people into the desert just to kill them. He reminds God of his unbreakable oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God, the narrative says, relents. Moses descends the mountain, the two stone tablets bearing the divine inscription in his hands. As he and his aide, Joshua, get closer, they hear the sounds of the celebration. When Moses sees the calf and the wild dancing, his own anger explodes. He lifts the sacred tablets, the very symbol of the covenant, and hurls them to the ground at the base of the mountain, shattering them to pieces. It is a visceral, powerful statement. The people have broken the covenant. He storms into the camp, seizes the idol, melts it in the fire, grinds it into a fine powder, scatters it on the water. And in an act of poetic justice, he forces the Israelites to drink their sin. After a weak excuse from Aaron, Moses rallies his own tribe, the Levites, who remain loyal. They sweep through the camp and execute about 3,000 of the primary instigators. The party is over. The covenant is broken, but Moses, their faithful mediator, ascends the mountain once more to plead for forgiveness. The relationship is eventually restored, the covenant renewed on a fresh set of stone tablets, but a scar remains. After nearly a year at Sinai, the Israelites, now a nation organized by law and centered around a new portable shrine called the Tabernacle, finally break camp. They journey northward toward the borders of Canaan. And of course, they complain. They complain about the manna, calling it miserable food. They complain about everything. At last, they arrive at a lush oasis on the southern edge of their destination, a place called Kadesh Barnea. The promised land is within their grasp. Moses selects 12 leaders, one from each tribe, to go on a 40-day reconnaissance mission. They are to scout the land, its people, its fortifications, and its produce. The spies return, and their report begins with spectacular news. They carry a single cluster of grapes, so massive it has to be slung on a pole between two men. The land, they confirm, truly does flow with milk and honey. But then, the tone shifts. 10 of the spies deliver a report steeped in fear. The people there are powerful, descendants of giants, they claim. The cities are massive and heavily fortified. We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are, they insist. They conclude with a statement of utter self-defeat. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Only 2 of the spies, Caleb of the tribe of Judah and Joshua of the tribe of Ephraim, offer a dissenting view. They plead with the people to have faith. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good, Caleb declares. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land and will give it to us. But the seed of fear has been sown, and it sprouts into full-blown panic and rebellion. A collective wail of despair rises from the camp. They weep all night, turning on Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, or in this wilderness, they cry. Their solution is a complete rejection of their entire journey. Let's choose a leader and go back to Egypt. For a people who supposedly hated slavery, they showed a remarkable eagerness to return to it. This is the ultimate failure of faith. They stand at the very threshold of the promise, and they refuse to enter. As they threaten to stone Joshua and Caleb, the glorious presence of God appears at the tabernacle, and judgment is pronounced. Once again, Moses intercedes, successfully pleading with God not to wipe them out completely. But while the nation is spared, the generation that rebelled is condemned. Every person, 20 years of age or older, who crumbled and refused to trust, will not see the promised land. Their punishment is to wander in the wilderness until their bodies lie scattered in the sand. For each of the 40 days the spies were in the land, they are sentenced to 1 year of wandering. 40 years. Their children, the very ones they feared would be captured, will be the generation that finally inherits the promise. As the people turn their backs on Canaan and trudge back into the desolate landscape of the Paran Desert, their journey of liberation becomes a long, slow funeral march, a 40-year process of forging a new people in the crucible of their parents' failure. Historians and archaeologists still argue intensely about this period, as direct evidence for a massive population wandering the Sinai for 40 years has not been found. But for the nation of Israel, this time of wandering became the defining story of their birth. The 40 years drain away into the desert sands, and with them, an entire generation. The bodies of the faithless are buried one by one under the relentless sun. Miriam, the prophetess who sang at the sea, dies. Aaron, the high priest who fashioned a golden calf, breathes his last on Mount Hor. Finally, Moses himself, the great lawgiver, now 120 years old, reaches the end of his journey from the plains of Moab on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. He gathers the new generation, the children who grew up on manna and miracles, and delivers a series of powerful final speeches. He retells their story, recites their laws, and pleads with them to remain faithful in the land they are about to possess. He knows he will not be joining them. In a public ceremony, he lays his hands on Joshua, formally transferring authority to his trusted successor. Then, alone, he ascends to the top of Mount Nebo. From that high vantage point, God shows him the full sweep of the promised land, from the hills of Gilead to the western sea. It is a beautiful, heartbreaking panorama of a destination he will never reach. There, on the mountain, Moses dies, and the narrative says he was buried by God himself in a valley no one has ever found. The age of Moses is over. The age of Joshua has begun. A new voice speaks to the new leader, a voice of firm reassurance. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River. I will be with you. I will never leave you, nor forsake you. Joshua, ever the practical military commander, immediately begins preparations. His first move is to send 2 spies across the river to reconnoiter the first great obstacle in their path, the formidable ancient city of Jericho. The spies slip into the city and find refuge in the most unlikely of places, the house of a prostitute named Rahab, whose home was built into the city wall itself. The king of Jericho learns of their presence and sends soldiers, but Rahab hides the spies on her roof under stalks of flax. She then explains her extraordinary act. The stories of the Hebrews' God, she says, have reached Jericho. the parting of the Red Sea, the victories in the wilderness. A holy fear has fallen upon her people. She has come to a simple, stunning conclusion. The Lord, your God, is God in heaven above and on the earth below. She has switched her allegiance. She makes a deal. In exchange for her help, they must swear an oath to spare her and her entire family when the city falls. The spies agree. The signal will be a single scarlet cord tied in the window of her house. She lets them down by a rope through the window, and they escape into the hills. 3 days later, the entire nation of Israel moves to the banks of the Jordan River, which is swollen and overflowing with the spring floods. What happens next is a powerful echo of the miracle that began their journey. Joshua commands the priests to carry the sacred Ark of the Covenant and walk into the raging water. The moment their feet touch the river's edge, the water from upstream stops flowing. It piles up in a great heap miles away, while the water downstream flows onto the Dead Sea. A wide path of dry ground opens up, and the entire nation crosses over, with the priests and the ark standing firm in the middle of the riverbed until everyone is safely on the other side. This miracle cements Joshua's authority and serves as a spectacular sign to the new generation that the God who delivered their parents is with them still. Now they are in the land, camped on the plains before Jericho's imposing walls. The city's gates are sealed shut in fear. Joshua's battle plan, which he receives directly from a mysterious commander of the Lord's army, is one of the strangest in military history. His generals must have thought he'd spent a little too much time in the sun. For 6 days, the Israelite army, led by 7 priests blowing ram's horns, is to march silently around the city 1 time. On the 7th day, they are to march around it 7 times. At the end of the 7th lap, the priests are to sound a long, sustained blast on their horns, and at that signal, every soldier is to let out a great, unified shout. They follow the bizarre, ritualistic instructions to the letter. For 6 days, the only sound is the rhythmic tramp of feet and the eerie, constant bleating of the horns. On the 7th day, after the final circuit, the horns sound. Joshua gives the command, and a thunderous roar erupts from the throats of the entire army. And then, the impossible happens. The massive stone walls of Jericho crumble and collapse into a heap of rubble. The Israelites swarm into the defenseless city. The command for this first conquest is grim and absolute. The city is to be devoted to the ban, or herem, a practice of total destruction in a holy war, where all spoils, including lives, are consecrated to God. Every man, woman, child, and animal in Jericho is killed. Only Rahab and her family, safe behind the scarlet cord in their window, are spared. The city's gold, silver, and bronze are taken for the Lord's treasury. And then Jericho is burned to the ground. Archaeologists have long debated the story of Jericho, as excavations have shown that the site may not have been a large, fortified city at the time the biblical narrative takes place, leading some to see the story as more of a foundational legend than literal history. Riding high on this incredible victory, Joshua makes a critical mistake. He gets cocky. He sends a small detachment of only a few thousand men to take the next, much smaller town, a place called Ai. The result is a shocking and humiliating defeat. The Israelites are routed, and 36 of their men are killed. The hearts of the people melt with fear. A distraught Joshua falls on his face, and God reveals the reason for the failure. Someone has violated the ban at Jericho. Someone has secretly stolen some of the devoted plunder. The entire nation is held responsible for the sin of one man. Through a process of elimination, the culprit is identified. A man named Achan from the tribe of Judah. He confesses to taking a beautiful Babylonian robe, a bar of gold, and some silver coins, and hiding them under his tent. In a harsh demonstration of corporate holiness, Achan, his family, and all his possessions are taken to a valley, stoned to death, and burned. Once this sin is purged from the camp, Israel attacks Ai again, this time with a clever ambush strategy, and they are victorious. The lesson is clear. Their success depends not on their numbers or strategy, but on their absolute obedience. Following this, Joshua leads the entire nation to the heart of the newly won territory, to the twin mountains of Ebal and Gerizim, just as Moses had commanded. There he builds an altar, and with the 12 tribes arrayed before him, he reads aloud every word of the law, renewing the covenant and reminding them that this conquest is not for their own glory, but for the fulfillment of a holy promise. With the covenant renewed in the heart of Canaan, Joshua's military campaigns continue. A coalition of southern kings is defeated in a legendary battle where Joshua, in a cry of faith, asks God to make the sun and moon stand still, to give them enough daylight to complete the victory. A northern coalition is likewise routed. The land is largely broken, but the conquest is incomplete. Pockets of Canaanite peoples remain, entrenched in fortified cities and coastal plains. The task of clearing these remaining territories is left to the individual tribes as they settle their allotted portions of land. Before his death, the aged Joshua oversees the solemn process of dividing the inheritance by lot, tribe by tribe. The sacred tabernacle finds a semi-permanent home at a place called Shiloh. Then, like Moses before him, Joshua gathers the people for one final impassioned address. He warns them starkly of the dangers of complacency, of intermarrying with the surrounding peoples, of being lured into the worship of their seductive nature gods. He lays down a challenge that rings through their history. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Soon after, Joshua dies, and so too, one by one, do all the elders of his generation. As long as that generation lived, the one that had witnessed the miracles of the conquest, the nation remained faithful. But then, a new generation arises, born in the land, a generation that knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. They did not see the Jordan part or the walls of Jericho fall. The stories of their parents and grandparents began to feel like distant legends, and in the absence of a strong, central leader like Moses or Joshua, the tribal confederacy begins to fray. They fail to drive out the remaining Canaanites. Instead, they begin to live alongside them, and soon to live like them. This begins a long, dark, and bloody chapter in their story, an era defined by a miserable, repeating cycle. It's the original binge, watch, and regret cycle of history. First, the people would forget their God and begin worshipping the local deities, Baal, the god of storms and fertility. and his consort Asherah. Then, their covenant broken, God would allow a neighboring power, Moabites, Midianites, Philistines, to oppress and plunder them. Then, in their misery, the people would cry out for deliverance, and God would raise up a leader, a judge, not a robed magistrate, but a charismatic military chieftain who would rally a tribe or two and throw off the yoke of the oppressor. Then, the land would have peace for a while until the judge died, and the people, with a stunning lack of historical memory, would slide back into apostasy, and the whole dreary cycle would begin again. The judges themselves were a motley crew of flawed heroes and heroines. There was Deborah, a prophetess, and the only female judge, who held court under a palm tree, with the Israelites being cruelly oppressed by a Canaanite king and his general, Sisera, who commanded a terrifying force of 900 iron chariots. Deborah summons a reluctant Israelite commander named Barak. She assures him of victory, but tells him that because of his hesitation, the honor will go to a woman. In the ensuing battle, a divine-sent flash flood neutralizes the Canaanite chariots in the mud of a riverbed, and their army is routed. The general, Sisera, flees on foot and takes refuge in the tent of a woman named Jael, offering him a comforting bowl of milk. Jael waits until the exhausted general falls asleep, and then, with grim resolve, she takes a hammer and drives a tent peg through his temple, pinning his head to the ground. Then there was Gideon, a man from a weak and insignificant clan, who we first meet hiding from marauding Midianites, threshing his grain in a winepress to keep it secret. An angel of the Lord appears to him and calls him a mighty warrior, which at that moment sounds like a cruel joke. Riddled with insecurity, Gideon repeatedly asks for a sign, famously putting out a sheep's fleece, asking God to make it wet with dew while the ground stayed dry. And then the reverse. Convinced at last, he gathers an army, but God tells him it's too large. Israel might claim the victory for themselves. He whittles the force of 32,000 down to a mere 300 men by sending home anyone who is afraid, and then choosing only those who lap water from their hands like a dog. With this tiny force, Gideon launches a brilliant psychological night attack, surrounding the massive Midianite camp, and on cue, smashing clay jars to reveal hidden torches, blowing their trumpets, and shouting, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The Midianites, waking in terror and confusion, turn on each other in the darkness and flee in a panic. But Gideon's story, too, ends in compromise, as he fashions a golden object that becomes an idol for his people. The downward spiral of the era is perfectly embodied in its most famous and most tragic judge, Samson. His story is not one of national deliverance, but of personal vendetta. A Nazirite from birth, set apart for God, and forbidden to cut his hair, he is blessed with supernatural strength, but he is also cursed with a profound weakness for Philistine women and a complete disregard for his sacred vows. His life is a chaotic mess of riddles, brawls, and ill-advised romances. It seems he could have really used some better relationship advice. He ties torches to the tails of 300 foxes to burn Philistine grain fields, slaughters 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, and constantly flirts with disaster. His downfall comes through the treacherous Delilah, who, paid in silver, badgers him relentlessly until he finally reveals the secret of his strength. His uncut hair. She lulls him to sleep in her lap, has his 7 braids shorn off, and he awakens to find his strength gone. The Philistines capture him, gouge out his eyes, and force him to grind grain in a prison, a beast of burden. In the end, his hair having grown back, he is brought out to be mocked in the temple of the Philistine god Dagon. With one final prayer for strength, the blind Samson places his hands on the 2 central pillars of the temple and brings the entire structure crashing down, killing himself and thousands of his enemies. He was a hero, but a broken one, a perfect symbol for his time. These stories, and others like them, all illustrate the same bleak reality, a truth repeated like a refrain at the end of the book. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. The age of the judges ends not with a bang, but with a series of horrifying whimpers that reveal a society in complete moral collapse. The final stories in the book of Judges are tales of idolatry, rape, and a brutal civil war that nearly annihilates the entire tribe of Benjamin. The haunting refrain, everyone did as they saw fit, becomes a diagnosis of a nation rotting from the inside out. Compounding this internal decay is a formidable external threat. The Philistines, a seafaring people settled on the coastal plain, have become an organized and aggressive military power. Historians emphasize the Philistine monopoly on iron technology at the time, which gave them a crushing advantage with their iron chariots and weapons against the Bronze Age Israelites. The old system of raising a volunteer army around a charismatic judge was no longer enough. The nation was desperate for a new kind of leadership. Into this turbulent time, a transitional figure is born. The story begins not on a battlefield, but with the quiet anguish of a woman named Hannah. She is one of 2 wives of a man named Elkanah, and she is barren. Year after year, at the annual festival at the central sanctuary in Shiloh, her rival wife, Peninnah, would taunt her mercilessly. One year, in deep distress, Hannah goes to the sanctuary to pray. She weeps bitterly, pouring out her heart to God, her lips moving but no sound coming out. She makes a vow. If God will give her a son, she will dedicate him to the Lord's service for his entire life. The old high priest, Eli, sitting nearby, sees her and makes a rather uncharitable assumption. "How long are you going to stay drunk?" he mutters. Hannah explains her grief, and Eli, softening, blesses her. Within a year, her prayer is answered. She gives birth to a son and names him Samuel. Once the boy is weaned, Hannah, true to her vow, brings him back to Shiloh and presents him to Eli, a small child given over to a lifetime of service in the house of God. Young Samuel grows up in the sanctuary, but it is a place where the light is dimming. Eli is a good man, but weak, and his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who serve as priests, are corrupt scoundrels. They abuse their position, stealing the best parts of the sacrifices and behaving immorally. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. One night, as Samuel is sleeping near the sacred ark of the covenant, he hears a voice call his name. Thinking it is the old priest, he runs to Eli's side. "Here I am," he says. But Eli hadn't called. This happens a second, and then a third time. Finally, the aging priest realizes what is happening. Go and lie down, he tells the boy, and if he calls you, say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Samuel does, and this time God speaks to him, delivering a terrible prophecy of judgment against Eli and his corrupt sons. From that night on, Samuel is established as a true prophet in Israel. The judgment he prophesied arrives swiftly. In a disastrous battle against the Philistines, the Israelites are being badly beaten. In a desperate, superstitious gambit, they bring the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh onto the battlefield, hoping it will act as a lucky charm. The Philistines, initially terrified of the Hebrews' powerful God, redouble their efforts and win a crushing victory. Hophni and Phinehas are killed, and in a blow that shakes the nation to its core, the ark itself is captured. When a messenger brings the news back to Shiloh, the 98-year-old Eli, hearing of the ark's capture, falls backward from his chair, breaks his neck, and dies. The glory had indeed departed. The Philistines, however, quickly discover that the Ark of the Covenant is the worst houseguest imaginable. They place their trophy in the temple of their chief god, Dagon. The next morning, they find the statue of Dagon toppled face down before the ark. The day after that, it's not only toppled, but its head and hands are broken off. Then, a plague of tumors and a panic sweeps through every Philistine city that houses the ark. After 7 miserable months, they wisely decide to send it back, loading it onto a cart with golden guilt offerings. In the wake of this national trauma, Samuel rises to prominence as the last and greatest of the judges. He rallies the people to turn away from their idols, and, under his leadership, they achieve a decisive victory over the Philistines, bringing a period of peace and stability. But years pass. Samuel grows old, and in a sad echo of Eli's story, his own sons prove to be corrupt and greedy judges. Seeing this, and still feeling the persistent threat of their enemies, the elders of Israel come to Samuel with a revolutionary demand. You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. They state bluntly, now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. Samuel is heartbroken. He sees this as a personal rejection, and more importantly, a theological betrayal. He takes the matter to God, who offers a weary, poignant perspective. Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. God instructs Samuel to give them their king, but first to deliver a solemn warning about the price of monarchy. Samuel spells it out for them. A king will conscript your sons for his army, and your daughters for his kitchens. He will take your best fields and vineyards. He will impose heavy taxes, taking 1/10 of your grain and your flocks. He will take your servants and your livestock for his own use. You yourselves will become his slaves, he warns, and when you finally cry out for relief, the Lord will not answer. But the people are resolute. Their minds are made up. No, they reply. We want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. Their demand is accepted. The age of the judges is over. The age of the monarchy is about to begin. The narrative then cuts away from the great prophet and the national debate, zooming in on a simple domestic problem. A man named Kish, from the small tribe of Benjamin, has lost his donkeys. He sends his son, a young man named Saul, who is described as being a head taller than anyone else and exceptionally handsome, out to find them. And so, Saul and a servant set off on what seems like a mundane agricultural errand, a wild donkey chase across the hill country, completely unaware that this dusty, fruitless search is leading him step by step towards the prophet Samuel and toward an anointing that will change his life and the life of his nation forever. Saul's kingship, born from the people's demand, begins with promise. He is a tall, charismatic warrior who secures a few key victories, uniting the tribes against their enemies. But the pressures of the crown and a deep-seated insecurity begin to fray his character. The prophet Samuel, his spiritual advisor, gives him a direct order from God before a major battle with the Philistines. Wait 7 days for him to arrive and offer the proper sacrifices. But as the days pass and the Philistine army gathers, Saul's army begins to desert. In a panic, Saul takes matters into his own hands and performs the sacrifice himself, a role strictly reserved for a priest. The moment he finishes, Samuel arrives. His rebuke is swift and devastating. "You have done a foolish thing," he says. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. Your kingdom will not endure." Saul gets one last chance to prove his obedience. Samuel brings him another divine command. He is to utterly destroy the Amalekites, an ancient enemy of Israel, leaving nothing and no one alive. Saul wins a decisive victory, but he again disobeys. He spares Agag, the Amalekite king, as a royal trophy, and he keeps the best of the sheep and cattle, offering the flimsy excuse that he was saving them to sacrifice to God. Samuel's arrival is freighted with sorrow and judgment. He delivers one of the most powerful lines in their sacred story. "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice." With that, he announces God's final, irrevocable verdict. "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." With Saul's reign now a hollow shell, God sends the grieving Samuel on a secret mission. He is to go to the little town of Bethlehem, to the house of a man named Jesse, to anoint the next king from among his sons. Samuel arrives, and Jesse, honored and nervous, parades his sons before the great prophet. The first, Eliab, is tall and impressive, and Samuel thinks, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here." But God corrects him with a quiet, history-shaping insight. "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." One by one, 7 of Jesse's sons pass before Samuel, and one by one, they are rejected. Puzzled, Samuel asks, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse replies with an almost forgotten afterthought, "Oh, right, there's that other one, the one who actually does all the work. The youngest is out tending the sheep." The boy is sent for. His name is David. He is described as ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. As he stands before them, the divine word comes to Samuel, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." Samuel takes his horn of oil and anoints the young shepherd boy in the presence of his stunned brothers. From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord comes powerfully upon David. In a mirror image of this event, the Spirit of the Lord departs from King Saul. who begins to be tormented by a dark, oppressive spirit, plunging him into fits of rage and paranoia. Ironically, it is this torment that first brings the two kings together. Saul's servants suggest that music might soothe him, and one recommends the son of Jesse, describing him not just as a skilled harpist, but as a brave man, a good speaker, and one with whom the Lord is present. So David is brought to the royal court. Whenever Saul's dark mood descends, the shepherd boy plays his lyre, and the music would bring relief to the troubled king. Saul grows to love the young musician and makes him his personal armor-bearer, completely unaware that he is nurturing his own replacement. David is soon sent back to his shepherding, but his path crosses Saul's again in the valley of Elah, the site of a national crisis. The Israelite and Philistine armies are dug in on opposite hills, locked in a stalemate. Every morning and every evening for 40 days, a Philistine champion emerges to challenge the Israelites to single combat. His name is Goliath, a giant from Gath, over 9 feet tall, clad head to toe in heavy bronze armor. The sound of his booming voice, mocking Israel and their God, sends a wave of terror through the Israelite camp. Not a single soldier, including the tall King Saul, dares to face him. Into this scene of paralysis walks David, sent by his father to bring supplies to his older brothers. He hears Goliath's defiant roar and is filled not with fear, but with a righteous anger. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? He asks. His words of shocking courage reach King Saul, who summons the boy. David volunteers to fight the giant. Saul is dismissive until David explains how he has fought off and killed both lions and bears with his bare hands to protect his father's flock. He insists that the same God who saved him then will save him now. Saul reluctantly agrees and offers David his own royal armor. David tries it on, but it's too heavy and unfamiliar. It's the classic, thanks, but this isn't my style moment. But with life or death stakes, he takes it off, and instead walks to a nearby stream and chooses 5 smooth stones for his sling. He approaches the giant armed with only his staff and his shepherd's sling. Goliath is deeply insulted by the sight of this young boy. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" he bellows. David's reply is a declaration of faith that echoes down the ages. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." Before the giant can close the distance, David places a stone in his sling, whirls it, and lets it fly. The stone whistles through the air and sinks deep into Goliath's forehead. The giant crashes face down on the ground. The shepherd boy has felled the warrior. The Philistine army, seeing their champion fall, breaks and flees. David becomes an instant hero, a symbol of hope for the entire nation. He and Saul's son, Jonathan, form a deep and immediate friendship. But as the victorious army returns, women come out of the towns, singing and dancing, and their song contains a fateful comparison. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. The words are a poisoned dart to Saul's insecure soul. A murderous jealousy is born in that moment. What more can he get but the kingdom? He fumes. Not long after, while David is playing the lyre for him as he used to, Saul, in a fit of paranoid rage, hurls his spear, trying to pin the young man to the wall. David dodges it, not once, but twice. The king's favor has turned to deadly hatred. David, the anointed king, the giant slayer, the hero of Israel, is now a fugitive, forced to flee for his life from the very man he was chosen to replace. David's life as a fugitive is a masterclass in survival and leadership. He gathers around him a loyal band of about 400 men, a motley crew of outcasts, debtors, and malcontents, and forges them into a disciplined guerrilla army in the caves of Adullam. It was the best support group for people on the run from the government that you could ask for. For years, he is relentlessly hunted through the wilderness by a jealous King Saul. Twice, David has the king's life in his hands. Once, in a dark cave, he creeps up on the unsuspecting Saul and simply cuts off a corner of his robe, an act that fills him with immediate guilt for having lifted his hand against the Lord's anointed. Another time, he and a companion sneak into Saul's sleeping camp and take the king's own spear and water jug from right beside his head. Both times, David proves that he will not seize the throne by force. He will wait for God to give it to him. The end for Saul comes not at David's hand, but at the hands of the Philistines in a devastating battle on Mount Gilboa. The Israelite army is shattered. Saul's 3 sons, including David's beloved friend Jonathan, are killed. Saul, grievously wounded by archers and facing capture, falls on his own sword. It is a bleak and tragic end for Israel's first king. When news of the deaths reaches David, there is no celebration. There is only profound, gut-wrenching grief. He composes a beautiful, aching lament for the 2 men who represented his past and his future, mourning the fall of the mighty. With Saul dead, David is anointed king by his own tribe of Judah in the southern city of Hebron. But the northern tribes, loyal to Saul's house, crown Saul's one remaining son, Ishbosheth, as their king. A bitter civil war ensues, dragging on for years and weakening the nation. But David's power and influence steadily grow, while the house of Saul crumbles from within, undone by assassinations and betrayals. Finally, with his rivals all dead, much to David's expressed sorrow, the elders of the northern tribes come to Hebron. They acknowledge his leadership, his shared kinship, and his divine calling. There, they anoint him king over a finally united Israel. His first act as king of the unified nation is a stroke of political and military genius. He needs a capital, but one that isn't associated with any single tribe, a neutral city to be his own. He sets his sights on Jerusalem, a virtually impregnable fortress still controlled by a Canaanite tribe called the Jebusites. He conquers the city, not with a massive siege, but with a daring commando raid up its water shaft, and renames it the City of David. Debate among archaeologists continues regarding the size and influence of David's Jerusalem. While some see it as a modest chiefdom, recent discoveries of large-scale structures from the period have led others to argue for a powerful, centralized kingdom. Just as the biblical text describes, David establishes Jerusalem as his political center. But he knows it must also be the nation's spiritual heart. He decides to bring the Ark of the Covenant, which had been languishing in obscurity for decades, into his new capital. The procession is a joyous, raucous, and spectacular affair. As the ark enters the city, David, overwhelmed with religious ecstasy, casts off his royal dignity, and wearing only a simple linen garment, he dances with wild abandon before the Lord. His wife Michal, Saul's daughter, watches from a window and is filled with contempt for his undignified display, a bitter reminder of the old dynasty's resentment toward the new. Now secure in a fine palace built of cedar, David's conscience is pricked by the fact that the Ark of God still dwells in a tent. He resolves to build a magnificent permanent temple, but the prophet Nathan brings him a message from God with a surprising twist. David, a man of war, will not be the one to build God's house. Instead, God will build David a house, an everlasting dynasty. This is the Davidic covenant, a promise that a son from David's line will always sit on the throne, a kingdom that will endure forever. It's a promise that will become the foundation for all future messianic hope in Israel. David's reign becomes a golden age. He consolidates his power, finally subjugates the Philistines, and expands his borders in every direction, creating a small empire that enjoys peace and unprecedented prosperity. He is at the absolute zenith of his power, a beloved king, a brilliant general, a gifted poet, and a man after God's own heart. And it is here, at the peak of his success, that he falls. One spring, when kings go off to war, David stays behind in Jerusalem. Pacing on his palace roof one evening, he looks down and sees a beautiful woman bathing. Her name is Bathsheba. Overcome with lust, he sends for her. He knows she is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of his most elite and loyal soldiers, currently away at the front lines. He sleeps with her, and she conceives a child. Panic sets in. David orchestrates a cover-up. He recalls Uriah from the battlefield, hoping the soldier will sleep with his wife, thus providing a plausible explanation for the pregnancy. But Uriah is a man of impeccable honor. He refuses to enjoy the comforts of his home and his wife while his comrades are sleeping in the open fields of battle. David's plan fails. His deception now curdles into something far darker. He resorts to murder by proxy. He writes a letter to his general, Joab, seals it, and gives it to Uriah himself to deliver. The letter contains a simple, chilling command. Put Uriah out in front, where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die. It's a classic case of the cover-up being so much worse than the original crime. Joab follows the order. Uriah is killed. After a brief period of mourning, David takes Bathsheba as his wife, and the baby is born. He has a new wife, a new son, and a secret he believes is safely buried. But the prophet Nathan knows. He comes to the king and tells him a simple story, a parable. There were two men, one rich and one poor. The rich man had many flocks, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb that he loved like a daughter. A traveler came to the rich man, who, unwilling to take from his own flock, stole the poor man's lamb and prepared it for his guest. David's sense of justice is enraged. He rises in fury and condemns the man in the story, declaring, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die." Nathan waits a beat, then fixes his eyes on the king and delivers four of the most terrifying words in the entire narrative. "You are the man." The prophet Nathan's words hang in the air, and David, the mighty king, crumbles in repentance. But forgiveness does not erase the consequences. The prophet's verdict was twofold. The child of his adulterous union will die, and the sword will never depart from his own house. The first part comes to pass immediately. The infant falls ill and dies, despite David's desperate prayers. The second part unfolds over the rest of his reign in a series of horrific family tragedies. The violence he committed in secret against Uriah now erupts publicly within his own family. His firstborn son, Amnon, brutally rapes his own half-sister, Tamar. David is furious, but his moral authority is gone, and he does nothing. Tamar's brother, the handsome and charismatic Absalom, nurses a cold hatred for 2 years before orchestrating Amnon's murder at a royal feast. Absalom flees into exile, but eventually David allows him to return to Jerusalem. This act of mercy backfires. Feeling alienated and ambitious, Absalom begins a masterful, long-term campaign of sedition. He stations himself at the city gates, intercepting people on their way to the king for justice, sympathizing with their cases, and whispering how much better things would be if he were in charge. He steals the hearts of the people, and when the time is right, he has himself declared king and launches a full-scale rebellion. David, the great warrior, is forced to flee his own capital, a sad, shuffling procession of a man, weeping as he walks barefoot out of Jerusalem, a painful echo of his flight from Saul decades earlier. The ensuing civil war is a national trauma, culminating in a battle where Absalom's forces are routed. Absalom himself, fleeing on a mule, gets his famously long and beautiful hair caught in the thick branches of an oak tree, leaving him dangling helplessly. It's a tragic lesson in the dangers of having hair that is too magnificent for its own good. Against David's explicit command to spare his son, the ruthless General Joab finds him and kills him. The news of his rebel son's death utterly breaks the king, who retreats to a chamber, weeping, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you." The twilight of David's reign is poisoned by this grief and further court intrigue. As he lies old and frail, another son, Adonijah, makes a bid for the throne. But the prophet Nathan and David's wife, Bathsheba, act quickly, persuading the dying king to officially name their son, Solomon, as his successor. Solomon is hastily anointed, and upon David's death, he moves with ruthless efficiency to consolidate his power, executing or exiling anyone who poses a threat. The kingdom is finally at peace, secured by a cold, hard hand. Early in his reign, Solomon has a dream. In it, God offers him anything he desires. Solomon, in a moment of profound humility, does not ask for wealth or power, but for wisdom, a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. This selfless request pleases God so much that he grants Solomon not only legendary wisdom, but also the riches and honor he never asked for. This wisdom is soon put on public display in the famous case of two women, both claiming the same infant son. Solomon's shocking order to cut the baby in two and give half to each instantly reveals the true mother by her desperate, merciful cry. His reputation is sealed. Solomon's reign becomes the apex of Israel's glory. It is an era of peace, prosperity, and international prestige. He builds a trading fleet, forges alliances with neighboring kingdoms, and amasses a legendary fortune from trade and tribute. Silver, the text says, became as common as stones in Jerusalem. His greatest achievement, the project his father David could only dream of, is the construction of a permanent temple for the Lord. For 7 years, a massive workforce, including skilled artisans from Phoenicia, labors to build a breathtaking sanctuary. They use the finest cedar from Lebanon and stone quarried and cut on site. The interior is overlaid with pure gold, from the floors to the ceilings. In the innermost sanctum, the Holy of Holies, he places the Ark of the Covenant. At the dedication ceremony, Solomon offers a majestic prayer, and the glory of the Lord descends as a cloud, filling the very house he has built. But the seeds of the kingdom's ruin are planted in this same golden soil. Solomon's ambition is boundless. After finishing the temple, he spends the next 13 years building an even more lavish palace for himself, a subtle sign of shifting priorities. To fuel these colossal projects, he imposes a system of forced labor, conscripting thousands of his own people to work in the quarries and forests. This creates a deep and growing resentment, especially among the northern tribes, a direct fulfillment of Samuel's old warning about the ways of a king. Archaeologists have pointed to the discovery of remarkably similar massive city gates at the sites of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, all dating to Solomon's era, as evidence of a powerful and centralized royal administration capable of such large-scale building programs. His most catastrophic failure, however, is a matter of the heart. To cement his foreign alliances, Solomon marries hundreds of foreign princesses, 700 wives, and 300 concubines. Keeping track of birthdays and anniversaries in that palace must have required its own special kind of administrative genius. As he grows older, these wives, with their foreign customs and their foreign gods, turned his heart away. The king who built the magnificent temple for the one true God now builds shrines and high places for the gods of his wives. Chemosh of Moab, Moloch of Ammon, on the hills directly overlooking Jerusalem. The very center of monotheistic worship is now ringed with state-sanctioned pagan altars. He has broken the first and most fundamental commandment of the covenant. Judgment is pronounced. Because of his faithlessness, the kingdom will be torn in two. For the sake of his father David, the division will not happen in his lifetime, and his heir will be left with a single tribe. But the process has begun. The peace of Solomon's long reign begins to fray at the edges, and the wise king who had everything ends his life, having compromised it all, leaving behind a glittering but fatally fractured legacy. When the great King Solomon dies, he is buried in the city of his father David, leaving behind a kingdom that is outwardly magnificent but inwardly groaning under the weight of his ambition. His son, Rehoboam, ascends to the throne, but his succession is not a foregone conclusion. He travels to Shechem, the ancient heartland of the northern tribes, for the assembly to confirm his kingship, a clear sign that the union between North and South is more of a strained contract than a seamless bond. Awaiting him, there is a formidable adversary, Jeroboam, a former official of Solomon's who had once been told by the prophet Ahijah that he was destined to rule 10 of the 12 tribes. This prophecy forced him to flee to Egypt, but with Solomon dead, he has returned as the champion of the disaffected northerners. Jeroboam and the elders of the north approach Rehoboam not with rebellion, but with a reasonable, earnest plea. Your father put a heavy yoke on us, they say, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. It is a simple bargain. Ease the crushing taxes and the forced labor conscriptions that Solomon had imposed, and we will give you our loyalty. Rehoboam, in a rare moment of caution, asks for 3 days to think it over. In those 3 days, the fate of the kingdom is sealed. First, he consults the old men who had advised his father. Their counsel is wise and politically astute. They tell him to be a servant to the people, to speak kindly to them and grant their request, and in return, he would win their unending loyalty. But Rehoboam rejects their advice. He prefers the counsel of the young, arrogant nobles he grew up with, men who had only known the immense privilege of the royal court. He chose to take advice from his arrogant buddies over the guys who had successfully run a kingdom for 40 years. It's a management style that rarely ends well. Their advice is steeped in macho posturing. They tell him to show strength, to be even tougher than his father. On the third day, the assembly gathers, and Rehoboam delivers his answer. An answer so foolish and inflammatory, it has gone down as one of the great political blunders in history. Using the crude metaphor his friends had suggested, he thunders, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." The reaction is instantaneous and explosive. The northern tribes, their hopes for reform utterly shattered, erupt in a cry of open secession, a visceral rejection of the entire Davidic dynasty. "What share do we have in David?" they roar. "What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." Rehoboam, stunningly oblivious to the fury he has unleashed, makes one last disastrous move. He sends Adoniram, the very man who was in charge of the hated forced labor program, to assert his authority. The enraged northerners surround him and stone him to death. The king's tax collector lies dead in the street, and Rehoboam finally understands his peril. He scrambles into his royal chariot and flees for his life back to the safety of Jerusalem. The break is now complete and irreversible. The 10 northern tribes declare Jeroboam their king. Only the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin remain loyal to Rehoboam and the house of David. The united monarchy, which had lasted just over a century, is gone forever. Historians often view the split not just as a result of one king's folly, but as the breaking point of long simmering tensions between the powerful northern tribes and the southern tribe of Judah, which had dominated the united monarchy from its capital in Jerusalem. Now there are two kingdoms. In the north, the kingdom of Israel, larger, more populous, and controlling the more fertile land and lucrative trade routes. But it is also inherently unstable, lacking the dynastic continuity and the religious authority that Jerusalem provided. In the south, the smaller, more rugged kingdom of Judah, which now consists of little more than the tribal territories of Judah and Benjamin. It is poorer and more isolated, but it has two crucial assets: the capital city of Jerusalem, with its powerful defensive position, and most importantly, the temple and the divine promise of the Davidic covenant. The new king of Israel, Jeroboam, immediately faces a political and theological crisis. The law of Moses requires all Hebrew men to travel to the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year for the major festivals. But the temple is now in the capital of his enemy. Jeroboam fears that if his people continue this pilgrimage, their hearts will eventually be lured back to their old loyalties. To prevent this, he makes a fateful decision that will forever be known as the sin of Jeroboam. He decides to create his own independent religious system. When in doubt, it seems, Hebrew leaders in a panic had a strange fondness for making golden calves. It never worked out well before, but Jeroboam decided to give it another try. He establishes two new national shrines at the extreme ends of his kingdom, one at Bethel in the south and one at Dan in the north. And in them, he installs two golden calves, echoing the terrible apostasy at Sinai. He stands before his people and declares, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." He creates a new priesthood, made up of men from any tribe, not just the Levites, and he institutes new festivals. This act of religious schism, done for purely political reasons, tears at the very fabric of Israel's covenant identity and sets the northern kingdom on a dark path of idolatry from which it will never be redeemed. The glorious kingdom of David and Solomon is now just a memory, replaced by two rival nations, a family feud writ large, glaring at each other across a newly drawn and hostile border. In the decades following the Great Schism, the northern kingdom of Israel is a cauldron of political instability. The dynasty of Jeroboam is wiped out in a bloody coup, which is in turn overthrown by another. King after king rises and falls, most by assassination, and each one is said to have walked in the ways of Jeroboam, cementing the idolatrous system of the golden calves as the state religion. This chaotic period is finally brought to an end by a powerful army general named Omri, who seizes the throne and founds a new, stable, and internationally respected dynasty. The power of the Omride dynasty is confirmed by extra biblical sources like the Moabite stone, an inscription from a neighboring king that explicitly names Omri as the king of Israel and describes his regional influence. Omri builds a magnificent new capital city on a strategic hilltop, naming it Samaria. His son, Ahab, inherits this stable and prosperous kingdom. In many ways, Ahab is a successful monarch, a great builder, and a capable military leader. But in the eyes of the biblical narrative, he is the most wicked king Israel has yet seen. His fatal error is his marriage to Jezebel, the daughter of the king of Tyre. This isn't just a political alliance, it is an ideological invasion. Jezebel is a forceful, ruthless, and fanatically devout worshipper of her native god, Baal Melkart. She arrives in Israel not as a guest, but as a missionary for her faith. She persuades Ahab to build a massive temple to Baal in the capital city of Samaria, and supports hundreds of Baal's prophets at the royal table. More than this, she initiates a violent persecution, a systematic purge of the prophets of Israel's God, Yahweh. For the first time, idolatry isn't just a tolerated corruption, it is official state policy, enforced with the sword. Into this national crisis, a figure of wild and terrifying power appears as if from nowhere. His name is Elijah the Tishbite. He is a man of the wilderness, clad in a garment of hair with a leather belt, a stark contrast to the opulence of Ahab's court. He strides before the king and delivers a short, shocking decree that is a direct assault on Jezebel's god. since Baal was the god of storms and rain, the god of fertility. Elijah challenges him in his own domain. As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, he declares, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. Having thrown down this cosmic gauntlet, he vanishes. As a crippling drought begins to bake the land, Elijah is hidden by God, first by a desert brook where ravens bring him bread and meat, and then, in a deeply ironic twist, in the heart of Baal's own territory, the Phoenician town of Zarephath. There he stays with a poor widow whose small jar of flour and jug of oil miraculously never run out for the duration of the drought. After 3.5 years, the land is devastated and the famine is severe. God commands Elijah to go and present himself to Ahab. The meeting crackles with hostility. Is that you, you troubler of Israel? Ahab snarls. Elijah's reply is fearless. I have not made trouble for Israel, he says, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Elijah then proposes a public, definitive contest to settle the matter once and for all. He challenges Ahab to gather all 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the goddess Asherah to a showdown on the slopes of Mount Carmel. There, they will each prepare a bull for sacrifice, but no one will light a fire. The God who answers by fire, Elijah proclaims to the assembled crowd, he is God. The people agree. The prophets of Baal go first. They prepare their bull, place it on their altar, and begin to call on their God. They cry out his name from morning till noon. There is no sound, no response. They begin a frantic, limping dance around the altar. Still nothing. As the hours wear on, Elijah begins to mock them with blistering sarcasm. Shout louder, he taunts. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. Goaded by his taunts, they work themselves into a frenzy, gashing their own bodies with swords and spears until blood flows, a common practice in ecstatic pagan rituals. But it is all for nothing. The sky remains silent and empty. Finally, in the late afternoon, Elijah takes his turn. His every action is deliberate and symbolic. He rebuilds a broken altar to the Lord using 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel, a silent rebuke of the divided kingdom. He places the wood and the sacrifice on the altar. Then he has the people douse the entire offering with 12 large jars of precious water, soaking the wood, the sacrifice, and the stones, and filling a trench he had dug around the altar. In the midst of a drought, this is an act of supreme faith. With all possibility of deception removed, Elijah steps forward and offers a short, simple, powerful prayer. Answer me, Lord. Answer me, he cries, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God. The answer is instantaneous and terrifying. A brilliant fire flashes down from heaven and consumes everything: the offering, the wood, the stones of the altar, the very dust of the ground, and it even licks up the water in the trench. The crowd, seeing this, falls face down in terror and awe, and a single cry rises from 1,000 throats. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Seizing the moment, Elijah commands the people to capture the prophets of Baal. He takes them down to the Kishon Valley and executes all 450 of them, a brutal and decisive end to the contest. He then tells King Ahab that the drought is about to end. While Ahab goes to eat, Elijah climbs to the top of the mountain and crouches in prayer. He sends his servant 7 times to look out over the Mediterranean Sea. The first 6 times, he sees nothing. But on the 7th, he reports a tiny cloud, no bigger than a man's hand, rising from the water. That tiny cloud is the signal. Soon the sky grows black, the wind begins to howl, and a torrential downpour breaks over the parched land. As Ahab scrambles into his chariot to race back to his palace, Elijah, filled with a burst of divine energy, tucks his cloak into his belt and begins to run. In the driving rain, the rugged prophet of God outruns the royal chariot all the way back to the gates of the city. A final stunning display of the power that had just vanquished Baal on the mountain. The stunning victory on Mount Carmel is followed by a stunning collapse of courage. When King Ahab tells Queen Jezebel what Elijah has done, including the execution of her prophets, she is not intimidated. She is incandescent with rage. She sends a messenger to Elijah with a sworn, blood-chilling oath. By this time tomorrow, he will be as dead as the prophets he slaughtered. The man who had faced down an entire religious establishment, who had called fire from heaven, now finds his nerve shattered by the threat of one woman. He runs for his life. He flees south, out of Israel, out of Judah, and deep into the Beer-Sheba wilderness, where he finally collapses under a broom tree, praying for death. "I have had enough, Lord," he whispers. "Take my life." Sustained by an angel, he journeys for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, Mount Sinai, the very place where the covenant was born in thunder and fire. There, hiding in a cave, he pours out his despair to God, claiming he is the only faithful one left. God summons him to stand on the mountain, and a series of terrifying natural forces pass by. A mighty wind that shatters rocks, a violent earthquake, and a blazing fire. But the Lord is not in the wind, or the earthquake, or the fire. After the fire, there is the sound of a gentle whisper, a still, small voice. In this profound quiet, God speaks, comforting his prophet not with a show of power, but with an intimate presence. He assures Elijah he is not alone. There are 7,000 people in Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal, and gives him a final set of tasks, including the anointing of his own successor. Returning to Israel, Elijah finds a young man named Elisha plowing a field. Elijah walks up to him and, without a word, drapes his own rough cloak over the young man's shoulders. It is a symbolic call to leave everything and follow. Elisha understands. He says a quick farewell to his family, slaughters his oxen for a final feast, and becomes Elijah's devoted apprentice. The prophetic mantle is being prepared for a new generation. Before that mantle is passed, however, Elijah has one last confrontation with the corrupt house of Ahab. The king covets a beautiful vineyard that belongs to a common man named Naboth. But Naboth refuses to sell his ancestral land. Ahab goes home and sulks in his bed like a spoiled child. Jezebel, contemptuous of his weakness, takes matters into her own hands. She forges letters in the king's name, has Naboth falsely accused of treason and blasphemy by hired witnesses, and sees to it that he is stoned to death. Ahab then happily takes possession of the vineyard. But as he stands in his stolen property, Elijah appears before him one last time. He delivers a gruesome and inescapable prophecy of doom. Dogs will lick up Ahab's own blood in the very spot they licked Naboth's. And as for Jezebel, dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. The prophecies come true. Ahab dies in battle. Some years later, Elijah's own earthly journey comes to a spectacular end. As he and Elisha walk together, a chariot of fire, pulled by horses of fire, descends from the sky, separating them, and Elijah is taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha is left with only his master's fallen cloak and a double portion of his spirit. The age of Elijah is over. Elisha continues his work, and the house of Omri is eventually destroyed in a bloody coup, with Jezebel finally meeting her prophesied end. But the northern kingdom cannot escape its foundational sins. One weak and idolatrous king follows another, and all the while, on the eastern horizon, a new and terrifying power is rising. The Neo-Assyrian Empire is emerging from Mesopotamia, a ruthless, methodical, and brutally efficient military machine. Their imperial policy is one of pure terror, designed to crush the will of all who oppose them. They are the neighbors everyone hoped would never, ever move into the neighborhood, and their signature tactic upon conquering a nation is mass deportation, scattering the educated and skilled classes across their vast empire and importing foreigners to resettle the land, forever shattering a people's national identity. The biblical account of this period is powerfully corroborated by Assyrian records. The famous Black Obelisk, for instance, actually contains a carving of the Israelite king Jehu bowing and paying tribute to the Assyrian emperor, a vivid snapshot of Israel's status as a vassal to the rising superpower. The prophets of the era, men like Amos and Hosea, see the storm clouds gathering. They condemn Israel's social injustice and empty religious festivals, and they warn of a coming judgment from this northern superpower. But the warnings go unheeded. Israel tries to rebel, to form alliances with Egypt and its other neighbors, but it is a futile gesture. The Assyrian juggernaut is unstoppable. King Tiglath-Pileser III sweeps down, conquering the northern parts of Israel and deporting its population. A few years later, the last king of Israel, Hoshea, makes a final, desperate attempt to break free. In response, the Assyrian king Shalmaneser V marches his army down and lays siege to the capital city, Samaria. The siege lasts for 3 horrifying years. The magnificent capital built by Omri becomes a death trap of starvation, disease, and despair. Finally, in the year 722 BCE, the walls are breached and the city falls. The Assyrians, now under their new king Sargon II, do exactly what they always do. They round up the survivors, the scribes, the artisans, the leaders, the wealthy, and march them into exile. Their own records boast of deporting over 27,000 Israelites, scattering them in cities and provinces across the Assyrian Empire. To fill the void, they bring in foreigners from Babylon and other conquered lands to repopulate the territory. These new inhabitants intermarry with the few poor Israelite farmers left behind, and their mixed cultures and religions eventually give rise to the people who would be known as the Samaritans. The northern kingdom of Israel is no more. It has been utterly and completely erased from the map. Its 10 tribes, deported and scattered, lose their tribal structures, their history, their language, and their identity. They assimilate into the cultures of their captivity and vanish from the stage of history, becoming the enduring mystery of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The covenant family has been brutally torn apart, its northern half gone, seemingly forever. With the northern kingdom of Israel erased, the southern kingdom of Judah now stands alone, a tiny, solitary bastion of the covenant, surrounded on all sides by the vast and unforgiving Assyrian Empire. For decades, it survives as a vassal state, paying a crippling annual tribute to the emperor in Nineveh. Most of Judah's kings during this period are weak and compromised, allowing Assyrian idolatry to flourish in the land as a way of placating their overlords. But then, a king named Hezekiah ascends the throne, and a current of defiant faith surges through the nation. He initiates a sweeping religious reformation, cleansing the temple of pagan paraphernalia, smashing idols, and tearing down the rural high places where illegitimate worship had festered for centuries. He even destroys the sacred bronze serpent that Moses himself had made, because the people had turned it into an object of worship. This religious purification is paired with a bold political rebellion. Hezekiah stops paying tribute to Assyria. In 701 BCE, the Assyrian emperor, Sennacherib, a master of brutal warfare, retaliates with overwhelming force. His army, the most feared in the world, sweeps into Judah, conquering and burning 46 of its walled cities, and deporting hundreds of thousands of its citizens. Finally, the Assyrian war machine arrives at the gates of Jerusalem itself and surrounds the city. The siege of Jerusalem is one of the best documented events from the period. The Assyrian king Sennacherib's own royal annals, inscribed on a clay prism, boast of shutting Hezekiah up in Jerusalem like a caged bird, but conspicuously failed to claim the city was captured, lending powerful support to the biblical account of the city's survival. From outside the walls, Sennacherib's field commander engages in masterful psychological warfare, shouting in perfect Hebrew so all the defenders can understand. He mocks their alliance with Egypt and warns them not to trust in Hezekiah or his God to save them. Inside the city, terror reigns. Hezekiah, his robes torn in grief, sends word to the great prophet of the age, Isaiah. Isaiah returns with a stunning message of defiance and hope from God. The Assyrian king will not set foot in the city, nor will he shoot an arrow here. I will defend this city and save it, the prophecy declares, for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. That night, according to the biblical account, a silent, mysterious plague sweeps through the Assyrian camp, leaving 185,000 soldiers dead by morning. Sennacherib, his army decimated, lifts the siege and limps back to Nineveh, where he is later assassinated by his own sons. Jerusalem has been saved. The miracle becomes a cornerstone of the city's identity, a belief in its own inviolability that will prove dangerous in the future. Despite this great deliverance, Hezekiah's pride gets the better of him. When envoys arrive from the up and coming kingdom of Babylon, he foolishly gives them a grand tour of his entire treasury. It's the ancient world equivalent of posting your bank account details online. It never ends well. Isaiah rebukes him, delivering the first chilling prophecy of a new threat. One day, the prophet says, all this wealth will be carried off to Babylon, and Hezekiah's own descendants will serve as eunuchs in the Babylonian king's palace. The immediate threat is gone, but a new one now looms on the distant horizon. Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, inherits the throne and proves to be a national disaster. In his long and spectacularly wicked 55-year reign, he meticulously undoes every single reform his father had made. He basically took his father's list of reforms and used it as a to-do list, but in reverse. He rebuilds the high places, erects altars to Baal, places pagan idols inside the temple itself, consults mediums, practices sorcery, and even sacrifices his own son in the fire. The narrative says he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood from one end to the other. And it is this long, dark reign of apostasy that finally seals Judah's fate. The sin is now too deep to be cleansed. Judgment is inevitable, but there is one last, brilliant flash of light before the darkness closes in. After Manasseh's death and the brief reign of his son, Manasseh's 8-year-old grandson, Josiah, becomes king. As a young man, he proves to have the heart of his great-grandfather, Hezekiah. He begins a nationwide purge of idolatry, even more thorough than the first. The turning point of his reign comes during a project to repair the long-neglected temple. The high priest, Hilkiah, makes a stunning discovery in a dusty side room, a scroll, which he identifies as the Book of the Law. It is likely an early version of the Book of Deuteronomy, containing the core of the Mosaic covenant and its blessings and curses. When the scroll is read to King Josiah, he is overcome with grief and horror. He tears his robes, realizing how flagrantly his nation has violated God's laws and the terrible judgment they now face. He gathers the entire population of Jerusalem at the temple, reads the ancient text aloud to them, and leads the nation in a solemn ceremony of covenant renewal. He then launches the most radical reformation in Judah's history. He doesn't just smash idols, he systematically destroys every last vestige of pagan and alternative worship in the entire land, centralizing all legitimate worship at the one temple in Jerusalem. He even travels north into the former territory of Israel and destroys the cursed altar that Jeroboam had set up at Bethel centuries earlier, fulfilling an ancient prophecy. He presides over a Passover celebration of such magnitude that nothing like it had been seen since the days of Samuel. For a brief, shining moment, it seems as if the nation has truly returned to its God, and that the coming doom might be averted. But the gears of geopolitics are grinding inexorably. The mighty Assyrian Empire is collapsing. A new superpower, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, is rising in the east, while the ancient power of Egypt is reasserting its influence from the south. In the year 609 BCE, the Egyptian pharaoh leads his army north to aid the last remnants of the Assyrian army against the Babylonians. For reasons that remain debated, King Josiah marches his small army out to intercept the Egyptians at a place called Megiddo. The result is a catastrophe. The good king, the great reformer, the last best hope for Judah, is killed in battle. His death extinguishes the light of his reformation, and his small, vulnerable kingdom is left leaderless, trapped between the millstones of two new empires fighting for control of the world. The death of the good King Josiah on the battlefield at Megiddo is the death of the last hope for the kingdom of Judah. The small nation is now a helpless pawn in the great game being played by the era's superpowers. First, the Egyptian pharaoh marches in, deposes Josiah's chosen successor, and installs a puppet king named Jehoiakim on the throne, demanding a heavy annual tribute. Then, in 605 BCE, the geopolitical map is redrawn in a single decisive battle. At Carchemish, on the banks of the Euphrates, the Babylonian crown prince Nebuchadnezzar annihilates the combined armies of Egypt and Assyria. In that one battle, the Neo-Babylonian Empire becomes the undisputed master of the ancient Near East. Judah simply swaps one overlord for another, its tribute payments now redirected to Babylon. During these chaotic final years, the dominant public voice is that of the prophet Jeremiah. For decades, he has been warning of this coming disaster, a message that has made him a pariah. His prophecy is bleak and, to the ears of the patriotic establishment, utterly treasonous. He declares that Judah's centuries of idolatry and injustice have made God's judgment unavoidable, and that this new power, Babylon, is God's chosen instrument of that judgment. Therefore, the only sane and faithful course of action is to submit to the Babylonian yoke. He is relentlessly opposed by other prophets who, remembering the miraculous deliverance from the Assyrians a century earlier, preach a popular message of peace, insisting that God would never allow his holy city or his sacred temple to be destroyed. King Jehoiakim, foolishly trusting in a promise of help from Egypt, decides to rebel against his new Babylonian master. Jeremiah warns him, he begs him, he performs dramatic symbolic acts in the streets, but the king will not listen. Nebuchadnezzar, his patience exhausted, dispatches his army. By the time they arrive in 597 BCE, Jehoiakim is dead, and his teenage son, Jehoiakim, has been on the throne for a mere 3 months. The young king wisely surrenders the city. Nebuchadnezzar's strategy at this stage is not yet total annihilation. Instead, he decapitates the nation. He deports the king, his family, the entire royal court, the top military officers, and all the skilled craftsmen and artisans, about 10,000 of the nation's elite. He also systematically loots the temple of the golden vessels Solomon had made. Among this first wave of exiles is a young priest named Ezekiel. Nebuchadnezzar then installs the former king's uncle, a weak and pliable man named Zedekiah, as his new puppet king, forcing him to swear a solemn oath of loyalty. Judah is now a crippled, impoverished state, stripped of its leadership and wealth. For nearly a decade, Zedekiah pays his tribute, walking a political tightrope. He is caught between the stark warnings of Jeremiah to remain loyal to Babylon and the constant pressure from his remaining officials, a fiercely nationalistic faction who are convinced that another rebellion, with help from Egypt, will succeed. Eventually, Zedekiah listens to the wrong voices. He breaks his sacred oath to Nebuchadnezzar and joins a regional anti-Babylonian coalition. It is the final, fatal error. In 588 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar returns, and this time, there will be no mercy. His intention is to solve his Judean problem permanently. The Babylonian army sweeps through the land, wiping out the remaining fortresses one by one. The desperation of these final years is vividly captured in the Lachish letters, a collection of pottery sherds with messages from a military outpost, which provide a real-time, eyewitness account of the Babylonian invasion as it unfolded. Finally, the Babylonians lay siege to Jerusalem itself. The siege is a slow, agonizing process of strangulation that lasts for nearly 2 years. The city is completely cut off from the outside world. Supplies run out. The accounts describe a famine so severe that parents resort to cannibalizing their own children. Disease runs rampant. Hope dies. In the summer of 586 BCE, after a 30-month ordeal, the Babylonian army breaches the northern wall of the city. What follows is a brutal, unrestrained sack. The soldiers rampage through the streets, killing, looting, and burning. King Zedekiah and a small band of soldiers try to escape under the cover of darkness, but are captured on the plains of Jericho. He is dragged before Nebuchadnezzar, who forces him to watch as all his sons are executed. Then, so that this horrific image will be the last thing he ever sees, Zedekiah's own eyes are put out. Blinded and in chains, he is taken to Babylon to die in a dungeon. A month later, Nebuchadnezzar's top general arrives in the smoldering city to carry out the final phase of its destruction. He and his men systematically burn everything of value: the royal palace, the homes of the nobility, every important building. They tear down Jerusalem's mighty defensive walls, and then they commit the ultimate act of desecration, the single most traumatic event in Judah's history. They march into the Temple of Solomon, the sacred space that had been the heart of their world for 400 years, the place they believed was the literal dwelling place of God on earth. They strip it of its last remaining treasures: the great bronze pillars, the bronze sea, all the sacred vessels, and then they set it on fire. The magnificent structure, the legacy of David and Solomon, is utterly consumed, collapsing into a heap of blackened rubble. A second, larger deportation follows, with thousands more being force-marched across the desert into exile. Only the poorest of the poor, the landless peasants, are left behind to tend the vineyards and fields. The Davidic monarchy is extinguished. The holy city is a ruin. The holy temple is gone. The land promised to Abraham has been laid waste, and his descendants are once again in bondage in a foreign land. The covenant appears to be broken, the promise nullified. Everything is lost. The long, sorrowful march of the deportees ends in the heart of a new and bewildering world. They are settled on the flat, fertile plains of Mesopotamia, a land of immense cities, towering ziggurats, and a complex network of man-made canals. The contrast with their rugged, hilly homeland could not be more stark. They are now aliens, a stateless people at the mercy of the empire that had destroyed their world. The famous Babylonian Chronicles, a series of clay tablets from the heart of the empire, provide remarkable external confirmation for these events, even recording the precise date of Nebuchadnezzar's first capture of Jerusalem and the Judean king. But the exile's crisis is far deeper than mere homesickness or political subjugation. It is a crisis of faith that shakes their identity to its very foundation. Everything they had believed about their God, Yahweh, seemed to be a lie. Their entire religion had been centered on three pillars: the Promised Land, the holy city of Jerusalem, and the Holy Temple, God's dwelling place. All three were now gone, laid waste by the armies of a king who worshipped the Babylonian god. Marduk. The terrifying question was unavoidable. Was Marduk stronger than Yahweh? Had their God been defeated and humiliated? Had his promises to Abraham and David been broken? How could they even worship him here? In the ancient world, gods were territorial. To be ripped from your land was to be ripped from your God. As one of their psalms so painfully asks, how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? Into this abyss of despair, two prophetic voices speak words that will allow the community not only to survive, but to be fundamentally reborn. From the ruins of Judah, the old prophet Jeremiah sends a letter to the exiles. Its message is stunningly counterintuitive. He tells them not to listen to the prophets who promise a swift return home. The exile will be long, he says, 70 years. Therefore, they must embrace a new way of living, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Telling a group of traumatized, homesick exiles to seek the prosperity of the city that just destroyed their home is a very bold therapeutic strategy. It is a radical call to put down roots, to become productive members of Babylonian society, while still maintaining their identity and trusting in a distant promise of restoration. The second, and perhaps more influential voice, belongs to Ezekiel, the priest who was among the first wave of deportees. His prophecies are wild, visionary, and perfectly suited to a disoriented people. Early in their exile, while sitting by the Kabar Canal, Ezekiel has a mind-bending vision of four living creatures and interlocking wheels, all supporting a magnificent mobile throne upon which sits the fiery glory of God. The vision's meaning is revolutionary. God is not trapped in the ruins of his temple in Jerusalem. His glory is not bound to a place. He is sovereign and free, able to be present with his people wherever they are, even here, in the heart of their captivity. It is a theological breakthrough that saves their faith. Later, after the final destruction of Jerusalem plunges the exiles into their deepest despair, Ezekiel delivers his most famous prophecy, the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. He sees a valley littered with a vast quantity of bleached, disconnected skeletons. God tells him to prophesy to the bones, and as he speaks, a rattling sound fills the valley as the bones click back together. Sinews and flesh appear on them, and then the breath of God enters them, and they stand up, a vast, living army. It is a powerful, unforgettable promise of national resurrection, an assurance that God can and will bring his dead people back to life. Guided by this prophetic hope, the exiles begin to forge a new way of being. With the temple and its sacrificial system gone, the very practice of their religion must change. They are forced to adapt, and in doing so, they lay the foundations for what will become modern Judaism. The focus shifts from place and ritual to text and community. The sacred scrolls, the Torah, the histories, the prophecies become their portable homeland, the new center of their religious life. Scribes, the men who could copy, study, and interpret these texts, rise in importance, becoming the new leaders in place of kings and priests. With the temple gone, they had to trade in grand sacrifices for intense study sessions. It was the birth of the world's most spiritually significant book club. It is likely during this period that the synagogue has its origins, as local communities gather in houses for prayer, reading of scripture, and mutual support. They also reinforce the practices that do not require a temple, the things that can mark them as a distinct people in a foreign sea of cultures. Sabbath observance, the covenant sign of circumcision, and the dietary laws become crucial boundary markers, visible, daily reminders of who they are and whose they are. And while they mourned their lost home, life in Babylon was not the brutal slavery their ancestors had endured in Egypt. They were allowed to live in their own communities, to farm, to engage in commerce, and some even achieved positions of prominence. But they never forgot who they were. They kept their genealogies, they told their stories, they taught their children the law, and they held fast to the hope of return, a hope best captured in the heartbreaking melody of their exilic song. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. As the Judean exiles settle into their new lives in Babylon, learning to be a nation without a land, the empire that held them captive begins to decay. Nebuchadnezzar's successors lack his strength, and the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which had seemed so invincible, grows decadent and weak. Meanwhile, a new power is rising in the east, a federation of Medes and Persians under the leadership of a political and military genius named Cyrus. A new prophetic voice arises among the exiles, a poet of breathtaking vision whose words are recorded in the later chapters of the book of Isaiah. He speaks a message of profound comfort, declaring that their time of punishment is over. And then he does something astounding. He names the pagan Persian king, Cyrus, as Yahweh's own instrument, his shepherd, even his anointed one, chosen to set his people free. It is a radical theology, claiming that the God of Israel is the universal sovereign of history, directing the rise and fall of empires for his own purposes. In 539 BCE, the prophecies come to pass. The army of Cyrus the Great reaches the gates of the mighty city of Babylon. The end of the empire is not a bloody, prolonged siege, but an almost anticlimactic capitulation. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, was deeply unpopular, and the Persian army enters the city with little to no resistance. Hailed by many as liberators, the 70-year dominion of Babylon is over. What happens next is what changes everything for the exiled Jews. Cyrus's imperial policy is the polar opposite of his predecessors. He believes that empires are best managed not through terror and deportation, but through tolerance and goodwill. His strategy is to win the loyalty of his subjects by respecting their cultures and their gods. This remarkable policy is confirmed by one of the most famous artifacts of the ancient world, the Cyrus cylinder. It is a clay, barrel-shaped document that describes Cyrus's conquest and explicitly states his policy of restoring cult statues to their shrines and allowing deported peoples to return to their homelands. True to this policy, in 538 BCE, just 1 year after his conquest, Cyrus issues a formal decree concerning the Jews. It is an act of unprecedented generosity. The edict, recorded in the Book of Ezra, grants any Jew in his empire permission to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple of their God. He even commands that the sacred temple vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had looted decades earlier be returned, and that the construction be subsidized by the royal Persian treasury. The news must have seemed like a dream. After 2 generations of exile, the way home was open. The response, however, is not a universal stampede for the exits. After 70 years, many were quite comfortable. They had been born in Babylon, built homes, established businesses, and for them, Judah was just a story, a distant, ruined land of their grandparents. The thought of a 4-month trek to a rustic fixer-upper opportunity was not universally appealing. Nevertheless, a wave of the most devout and idealistic exiles, a group of nearly 50,000, decides to make the journey. They are led by a man of the Davidic royal line named Zerubbabel and the high priest, Jeshua. They return, bearing the restored temple treasures and a fragile hope for a new beginning. What they find, however, is a harsh and sobering reality. The land is impoverished and semi-desolate. Jerusalem is a field of rubble, its walls broken down, its houses in ruins. The glorious city of David and Solomon exists only in memory. The land is also not empty. It is inhabited by the descendants of the poorest Judeans who were never exiled, and by the various peoples the Assyrians had settled there centuries before, who would come to be known as the Samaritans. The returnees' first priority is religious. They clear the rubble from the old Temple Mount, build a simple new altar, and for the first time in 2 generations, the smoke of daily sacrifices to Yahweh rises from Jerusalem once more. The following year, they manage to clear enough debris to lay the foundations for a new, second temple. The ceremony is a moment of powerful, conflicting emotions. As the foundation stones are set in place, the priests blow their trumpets and the people let out a great shout of joy. But many of the older priests and elders, who in their youth had seen the magnificent, sprawling glory of Solomon's temple, begin to weep loudly. To them, this new foundation is a small, pathetic shadow of what was lost. The sound that rises from the Temple Mount is a strange and poignant cacophony. The shouts of joy, indistinguishable from the sounds of weeping. This fragile new beginning almost immediately runs into trouble. The local inhabitants, the Samaritans, approach Zerubbabel and offer to help rebuild the temple, claiming that they too have worshipped Yahweh since the days of the Assyrian conquest. But the returning exiles, zealous to rebuild a pure community, free from the syncretism that they believe led to their downfall, flatly refuse their help. This rebuke turns the Samaritans from potential allies into bitter enemies. They begin a systematic campaign to undermine the project. It seems that bureaucratic meddling and writing complaining letters to the head office is an ancient and time-honored tradition for stopping any construction project. They send letters to the Persian court, spreading rumors and accusing the Jews of rebuilding their city to serve as a base for rebellion. The strategy works. A later Persian king, who knows nothing of Cyrus's original decree, is alarmed by the reports and issues a stop work order. The construction on the temple grinds to a halt. For 16 years, the foundation lies exposed to the elements, a monument to a half-finished dream, and a community that has lost its momentum, its initial burst of hopeful energy having dissipated into the harsh realities of politics and poverty. For 16 years, the foundation of the new temple lies dormant, a stark symbol of the community's stalled spirit. The initial zeal of the return has given way to apathy and a focus on personal survival. People are busy building and paneling their own houses while the house of the Lord remains a ruin. To shake them from this lethargy, two new prophets arise. The first, Haggai, is direct and pragmatic. His message is essentially the first ever divine sermon on the dangers of procrastinating on home improvement projects, just for God's home instead of your own. He bluntly connects the people's poor harvests and economic struggles to their misplaced priorities. The second prophet, Zechariah, offers soaring, mystical visions of a future glorified Jerusalem to reignite their hope and sense of divine purpose. The one-two punch of prophetic rebuke and inspiration works. The governor, Zerubbabel, and the high priest, Jeshua, rally the people, and the construction begins anew. When local Persian officials once again try to interfere, the Jewish leaders appeal directly to the new emperor, Darius the Great. A search is ordered in the royal archives, and a scroll containing Cyrus's original edict is found. Darius not only reaffirms the decree, but commands his officials to stay away and to fund the entire project from the regional taxes. With this imperial seal of approval, the work moves forward at a rapid pace. Finally, in 516 BCE, 70 years after its destruction by the Babylonians, the Second Temple is completed. It is a more modest affair than Solomon's glorious original, but its dedication is a moment of profound joy and relief. The sacrificial system is fully restored, and the symbolic heart of the nation beats once more. The narrative then falls silent for nearly 60 years. When it resumes, the temple is functioning, but the community, now known as Judea, is struggling. The city of Jerusalem remains a place of shame, its defensive walls still a pile of rubble, and a deep spiritual sickness has taken root. The people have once again begun to intermarry with their pagan neighbors, a practice the leaders see as the very sin that led to the exile in the first place. Into this situation comes a man named Ezra. He is a priest and a scribe living in Babylon, a man well versed in the law of Moses, who holds a position of respect in the Persian court. With the blessing of Emperor Artaxerxes, Ezra leads another wave of exiles back to Judah, his mission being to teach the Torah and re-establish the covenant as the law of the land. When Ezra arrives, he is utterly horrified to learn the extent of the intermarriage problem, which has infected even the priestly and noble families. In a dramatic public display of grief, he tears his clothes and his cloak, pulls out his own hair, and sits down in stunned silence until the evening sacrifice. He then offers a beautiful, heartbreaking prayer of public confession on behalf of his people. His authentic grief is contagious. The people gather around him, weeping, and they agree to deal with the crisis. The solution is drastic and, to modern sensibilities, exceptionally harsh. The leaders resolve that all the men who have taken foreign wives must divorce them and send both the women and their children away. It is a painful, surgical act intended to purify the community and preserve its unique identity as a people set apart by the covenant. A few years later, the final piece of the restoration puzzle falls into place. In the Persian capital of Susa, a man named Nehemiah, a Judean who holds the high trust position of cupbearer to the emperor, receives a report from his brother. The news is grim. The community in Jerusalem is in great trouble and disgrace because the city walls are still in ruins. Nehemiah is overwhelmed with sorrow. He weeps, fasts, and prays for days. Then, using his privileged access, he approaches the most powerful man in the world. With a trembling heart, he asks Emperor Artaxerxes not only for permission to go and rebuild the walls of his ancestral city, but also for an official appointment as governor, an armed escort, and royal letters authorizing timber from the king's forests. The emperor graciously grants his every request. Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem and, under the cover of night, personally inspects the full extent of the city's dilapidation. He then assembles the city's leaders and delivers an inspiring call to action. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. The people are stirred, and the massive project begins. The work is organized by family, with each household taking responsibility for the section of the wall nearest their own home. But they immediately face vicious opposition from local rivals, particularly a man named Sanballat the Horonite. He and his allies mock the Jews, conspire against them, and threaten to attack the work crews. Nehemiah's response is brilliant. He arms the builders. It was perhaps the most intense construction site in history, where you were as likely to need a trowel as a sword. Half the men worked while the other half stood guard, spears and shields at the ready, working with this incredible urgency. From sunrise until the stars came out, they complete the entire circuit of the wall in an astonishing 52 days. With the city now physically secure, the stage is set for the spiritual climax of the entire restoration era. Nehemiah and Ezra gather every man, woman, and child in the public square. Ezra, the scribe, stands on a specially built wooden platform, and, from daybreak until noon, he reads aloud from the book of the law of Moses. As the people listen to the sacred words, many for the first time, and as Levites move through the crowd explaining the text, a wave of comprehension and grief washes over them. They begin to weep for their past sins and their failure to live by these words. But Nehemiah tells them that this is not a day for mourning, but for celebration. For the joy of the Lord is your strength. Be led by Ezra and Nehemiah. The people recommit themselves to the covenant, making a binding agreement to obey the law, keep the Sabbath holy, and provide for the temple. The nation has been reborn, with a functioning temple, a secure capital city, and the Torah re-established as the center of their lives. They are no longer just a province of Persia. They are a holy community, a people of the book. For nearly 2 centuries after the work of Ezra and Nehemiah, Judea exists as a quiet, unremarkable province within the vast Persian Empire. It is a time of peace and consolidation, a silent period in their history where the community, now governed by the high priest and centered on the Torah, solidifies its identity. Then, in the 330s BCE, the entire world is turned upside down. A young, brilliant, and impossibly ambitious king from the backwater of Macedonia, Alexander the Great, explodes onto the world stage. In a little more than a decade, his unstoppable armies sweep across the globe, shattering the mighty Persian Empire and forging a new empire that stretches from Greece to India. But Alexander brings more than just a new government. He brings a new way of seeing the world. He is a fervent missionary for Greek culture, or Hellenism. Hellenism is a complete and seductive cultural package. The Greek language, which becomes the universal tongue of the educated and the elite. Greek philosophy, with its emphasis on reason and logic. Greek politics, centered on the city-state or polis. Greek art, obsessed with the idealized beauty of the human form. And Greek religion, with its pantheon of very human-like gods and goddesses. This culture, so different from their own, presents the Jews with their most profound challenge since the exile. Alexander's empire proves to be as short-lived as his own life. When he dies suddenly in 323 BCE, his generals, known as the Diadochi, immediately fall upon each other, carving up the empire in a half-century of brutal warfare. Judea, as always, is caught in the middle, a valuable piece of real estate wedged between the two most powerful of these new Hellenistic kingdoms, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom in Syria. For the first 100 years, Judea is ruled by the Ptolemies from their magnificent new capital of Alexandria. This is a period of relatively gentle, soft Hellenization. A large and vibrant Jewish community thrives in Alexandria. And it is here that the single most important literary event of the era takes place. As more and more Jews grow up speaking Greek as their primary language, a massive project is undertaken to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. This translation, the Septuagint, is a monumental achievement, a huge relief for anyone in the diaspora whose Hebrew was getting a little rusty. It opens the world of the Hebrew Bible to non-Jews for the first time and will become the scripture of choice for the early Christian church. Back in Judea, a deep cultural divide begins to form. On one side are the Hellenizers, typically the wealthy, urban, and priestly elites who are drawn to the sophistication and opportunities of Greek culture. They adopt Greek names, speak the language, and embrace Greek customs. On the other side are the traditionalists, known as the Hasidim or pious ones, who see Hellenism as a mortal threat, a pagan cancer that will destroy the foundations of their covenant faith. This struggle between assimilation and tradition simmers for a century. Around 200 BCE, the Seleucids conquer Judea from the Ptolemies, and the pressure to Hellenize intensifies. The breaking point comes under a king named Antiochus IV, an arrogant and erratic man who styles himself Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. He called himself God Manifest, which is a title that rarely belongs to a humble or well-adjusted individual. He begins treating the high priesthood in Jerusalem not as a sacred hereditary office, but as a political appointment to be sold to the highest bidder. Ambitious, Hellenized priests outbid each other, offering Antiochus massive sums of money for the position. One such usurper, a man named Jason, even receives permission to build a gymnasium, a center of Greek athletic and intellectual life, right next to the temple, a profound offense to the pious Jews. The crisis explodes in 169 BCE. Antiochus, returning from a humiliating military campaign in Egypt, marches into Jerusalem and to replenish his treasury, plunders the temple of its golden altar, its menorah, and its other sacred treasures. 2 years later, enraged by rumors of rebellion in the city, he decides to solve his Jewish problem once and for all. He unleashes his army on Jerusalem. And then, in an act of unprecedented brutality, he launches the first purely religious persecution in Western history. His goal is not just political control, but the complete eradication of the Jewish faith. He issues a series of decrees that strike at the very heart of their identity. The observance of the Sabbath and the traditional festivals is outlawed on pain of death. The sacred rite of circumcision is forbidden. Mothers who have their sons circumcised are executed with their infants hung around their necks. He commands that all copies of the Torah be found and burned. Then comes the ultimate act of blasphemy. In December of 167 BCE, Antiochus erects an idol of the Greek god Zeus within the sacred precincts of the temple. On the altar of burnt offering, he has a pig, an animal deemed profoundly unclean by Jewish law, sacrificed to the pagan god. This event is remembered with horror as the abomination of desolation. This vicious persecution backfires. Instead of crushing the Jewish spirit, it forges it into hard steel. The stories of this time are not of capitulation, but of martyrdom. An elderly and respected scribe named Eleazar is publicly executed for refusing to eat pork. In another famous story, a mother and her 7 sons are brought before Antiochus one by one. Each son is offered the chance to save his life by violating the law, and each one refuses, enduring horrific tortures before being put to death, all while their mother encourages them to remain faithful. This is a new development in their faith, the willingness to die not just for their nation, but for the sake of the Torah itself. The quiet clash of cultures has become a war for the soul of the people, a war that is about to turn from passive resistance into open, violent rebellion. The brutal persecution of Antiochus Epiphanes pushes the people of Judea to their breaking point. The revolt, when it finally comes, does not begin in the great city of Jerusalem, but in the small, dusty town of Modi'in. A Seleucid official arrives, builds a pagan altar, and orders the townspeople to offer a sacrifice to the Greek gods. He tries to compel a respected elder, a priest named Mattathias of the Hasmonean family, to be the first to comply. Mattathias refuses, but another, more assimilated Jew steps forward to make the offering. Seeing this act of public apostasy, Mattathias is consumed by a holy rage. He rushes forward and kills the man on the altar, then turns and kills the king's official. He tears down the pagan altar and lets out a great cry that will ignite a revolution. Let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me. With this irrevocable act of rebellion, Mattathias and his 5 sons flee into the rugged Judean hills. They are soon joined by other fugitives and the devout traditionalists known as the Hasidim. What begins as a desperate act of defiance slowly coalesces into a guerrilla army. The aged Mattathias dies shortly after, but not before appointing his 3rd son, Judas, to be their military commander. Judas is a man born for this moment, a military genius who earns the nickname Maccabeus, the hammer, for the crushing blows he deals to his enemies. Our understanding of this rebellion comes primarily from the ancient books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. 1st Maccabees reads like a sober historical chronicle, while 2nd Maccabees is a more theological account. Judas knows he cannot defeat the professional, well-equipped Seleucid army in a conventional battle, so he doesn't try. Instead, he uses his army's small size and their intimate knowledge of the landscape as a weapon. He was a master of the hit-and-run strategy, which is also a popular strategy for toddlers who have just broken a lamb. He leads his men in a series of brilliant ambushes, night raids, and lightning strikes in the narrow mountain passes, inflicting shocking defeats on far larger and superiorly armed forces, only to melt back into the wilderness before the enemy can regroup. The Maccabees were greatly helped by the fact that the Seleucid Empire was going through a period of intense political drama, with various claimants to the throne fighting each other, which prevented them from focusing their full military might on the Judean rebellion. With each stunning victory, Judas's legend grows, and more volunteers flock to his banner. After 3 years of relentless fighting, in the winter of 164 BCE, the Maccabean army achieves its primary objective. They recapture Jerusalem. They find the temple in a state of horrific desecration. Weeds are growing in the courtyards, the great gates have been burned, and the abomination of desolation, the pagan altar to Zeus, still stands on the holy altar of burnt offering. With great solemnity, Judas and his men cleanse and purify the entire sanctuary. They tear down the defiled altar and build a new one from uncut stones. They craft a new menorah, a new table for the bread, and a new altar of incense. On the 25th day of the month of Kislev, exactly 3 years after Antiochus had defiled it, the temple is rededicated to the worship of Yahweh with an 8-day festival of sacrifices, songs, and celebration. This victorious rededication is commemorated to this day by the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, but the war is far from over. Judas the Hammer continues to lead his armies, securing control over more and more of Judea. He even makes a treaty with the rising power in the west, the Roman Republic, a shrewd but ultimately fateful political move. Judas, always a warrior first, eventually falls in battle, fighting heroically against an overwhelmingly superior force. The leadership of the revolt, however, does not die with him. It passes to his younger brothers, first Jonathan and then Simon, who prove to be as skilled at diplomacy and political maneuvering as Judas was on the battlefield. Jonathan takes advantage of the constant internal strife within the Seleucid Empire, playing rival pretenders to the throne against each other and extracting concession after concession. In a controversial move, he secures for himself the appointment to the office of high priest, uniting the military and religious leadership of the nation in one person for the first time. After Jonathan is treacherously captured and killed, the last of the 5 brothers, Simon, takes command. It is Simon who brings the long struggle to its triumphant conclusion. He exploits the Seleucids' continued weakness to finally expel their last garrisons from Judea. And, around the year 142 BCE, he secures a formal recognition of Judea's complete political independence. In a great assembly, the people of Judea proclaim Simon as their high priest, their commander, and their prince, declaring that these offices would be hereditary for his family forever. The Hasmonean dynasty was born. After more than 4 centuries of domination by Babylonians, Persians, and Greeks, Judea is once again a free and sovereign nation. The desperate revolt of a single family of rural priests had, against all imaginable odds, not only saved the Jewish religion from annihilation, but had also forged a new, independent Jewish state in the hills of their ancestral homeland. The independence so fiercely won by the Maccabees lasts for less than a century before it begins to rot from within. The Hasmonean dynasty, which began with the pious priest Mattathias, devolves into a squabbling, power-hungry line of Hellenistic monarchs. They adopt Greek names, live in luxury, and poison and assassinate each other with a frequency that would make a Roman emperor blush. The nation once again fractures, this time between two religious parties: the Sadducees, the wealthy priestly aristocracy who control the temple, and the Pharisees, teachers of the law who hold the devotion of the common people. This internal decay culminates in a catastrophic civil war between two Hasmonean brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, who are fighting over the offices of king and high priest. In a moment of supreme and fatal miscalculation, both brothers appeal to the new, undisputed superpower of the world, the Roman Republic, to come and mediate their dispute. The Roman general, Pompey the Great, is only too happy to oblige. In 63 BCE, he marches his legions into Judea, and when one of the factions resists him, he lays siege to Jerusalem and captures it. Judean independence is over. In an act that sends a shock of horror through the Jewish world, the Roman general strides into the temple and enters the Holy of Holies, the sacred space where only the high priest was allowed once a year. The eagle of Rome had landed at the very heart of their faith. Judea is now a client state of Rome, and in the ensuing decades of chaos, a shrewd and ruthless Idumean nobleman named Herod rises to power through sheer political genius and the favor of his Roman patrons. The Roman Senate declares him King of the Jews. He is despised by his subjects as a half-breed and a Roman puppet, and he rules with paranoid brutality, murdering even his own wife and sons. Yet, he is also a builder of breathtaking vision. To placate the people and immortalize his name, he undertakes his most ambitious project, a complete and magnificent renovation of the Second Temple, turning it into one of the wonders of the ancient world. After Herod's death, direct Roman rule is imposed through a series of governors, and tensions between the occupied people and their pagan rulers fester and grow. This is the world of simmering resentment and fervent messianic hope into which Jesus of Nazareth is born. Decades of sporadic riots and rebellions finally boil over in the year 66 CE into a full-scale, nationwide revolt against the Roman Empire. Our most detailed and often only narrative for this turbulent era comes from the historian Flavius Josephus, a Jewish rebel commander who was captured by the Romans and switched sides, writing the history of his own people's tragic defeat from a Roman villa. The Great Revolt is a disaster from the start, a chaotic, desperate war marked by vicious infighting among the Jewish factions. The Roman response is methodical and overwhelming. The general Vespasian and his son Titus arrive with the full might of the Roman legions, crushing the rebellion region by region. In the spring of 70 CE, Titus surrounds the city of Jerusalem. The final siege is a 5-month nightmare of starvation, disease, and fratricidal violence within the walls. In late summer, the legions finally breach the defenses. They rampage through the city, slaughtering its inhabitants. And then, the unthinkable happens for a second and final time. Herod's magnificent temple, the glorious center of Jewish life and worship, is set on fire and burned to the ground. Its golden treasures looted and paraded through the streets of Rome. The war has one last tragic postscript. A small band of zealots holds out for 3 more years in the remote desert fortress of Masada. When the Romans finally complete a massive siege ramp and breach the walls, they are met with an eerie silence. The 960 defenders, seeing that all hope was lost, had taken their own lives, choosing death over slavery. With this last act of defiance, the story of the ancient Hebrews as a nation in their own land comes to an end. The city is a smoldering ruin. The temple is gone forever. The priesthood has ceased to exist. Hundreds of thousands are dead, and countless more are sold into slavery and scattered across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire. And so our long, long story comes to a quiet close. The journey that began with a single voice whispering to a man named Abraham in Mesopotamia. That journey of patriarchs and prophets, of kings and judges, a story of exodus and exile, of covenant and conquest, now rests in the silent, smoking ruins of a city on a hill. The great arc of this ancient history is complete, a tale of staggering faith and catastrophic failure, of divine deliverance and of human frailty. And though the temple would never be rebuilt, and the throne of David would remain empty, the people themselves, the children of this long and turbulent history, would endure. In the wake of this final destruction, they would learn once again, as they had in Babylon, how to be a nation without a land, how to build a home within a sacred book, carrying their story and their laws with them wherever they went. The ancient world had ended for them, but their journey was not over. It was simply entering a new and very different chapter. But that is a story for another time. For now, the dust of Jerusalem settles, the echoes of battle fade, the long tale is told, and all that is left is the quiet of the night. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to hear. It is time now to let the story go, to let the past recede like a distant dream, and to let your own mind grow still and quiet. It is time now simply to sleep.